Greetings, and welcome to a world of cold, darkness, and unrelenting pressure. The Genre Grinder Podcast. With me today is the incomparable Patrick Ripoll. Say hello, Patrick.
I've been down here 6 months, and I'm tired of it. Or at least it feels like this is a somewhat delayed podcast, so it feels like we're getting maybe a little antsy because we've been planning this for longer than we intended to.
Yeah. And it's actually, it's going to be interesting because you just watched these movies, and I actually watched them like 3 weeks ago, I think. So
okay, yeah.
We're going to have to fill in for each other. But anyway, yeah. So because Patrick's here, it means we're doing another deep dive into a single year that a specific genre peaked. And in the past, we did slasher movies 1989, the gialli of 1971, the spaghetti westerns of 1968. And now it's time to get real specific with the underwater, or I'm going to change this. I was saying underwater horror. I'm going to say the deep sea horror movies of 1989.
Hell yeah.
There were a total of 7 such films released this year. Technically 6. One was held back and released in 1990, but we'll get to that eventually at the end. Again, this will probably be 2 parts. In fact, this will definitely be 2 parts because this time we're actually recording it in 2 parts instead of recording for 7 hours and finding a place to split it and all that stuff. This is also another one of those subjects that sort of inspired Genre Grinder when I was initially thinking about covering these kinds of random fads. But I realized that there were usually just 2 or 3 movies. Like there would be Armageddon and Deep Impact and Mission to Mars and Red Planet. And that wouldn't make a very interesting podcast, just 2 movies. Also because most of those movies are kind of boring movies that other people have talked about. So I changed up what I was thinking. But this has always been in the back of my mind.
These movies are inherently interesting. At the very least, the 3 movies that we'll be talking about in this part of the podcast are inherently interesting because this subject matter is sort of like path of most resistance filmmaking.
Yes. Yeah, shooting underwater is stupid and bad, and you should never do it. It's the lesson you learn from the behind the scenes of The Abyss.
Or shooting on a soundstage that's flooded with water, also stupid and bad, and more trouble than it's worth.
And also this is going to be the most, like I mentioned, this is going to be the most specific. Like you can say that yes, their slasher movies took over the year 1981, but there was 30 different kinds of slasher movies. Like they were united by a pretty vague definition. These movies are surprisingly similar across the board. And if we're led to believe the filmmakers, that was all a coincidence.
There's a lot of context to get to for the sort of underwater sci-fi horror of 1989. This is pretty traceable. You can sort of look at all the facts of the case and understand how these movies ended up this way. So there's a little bit of context that we're going to get to before we talk about them. But the 3 movies we're going to be talking about, all from 1989, are James Cameron's The Abyss, Sean S. Cunningham's DeepStar Six, and George P. Cosmatos' Leviathan.
So you have all the context, the pre-film, the pre-89 context.
That's right. So basically, I wanted to really quick go over sort of all of the stuff that leads to why do people make movies underwater? That's not how light or cameras work. It's ridiculous. And the answer is Jules Verne. In 1870, Jules Verne wrote 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Captain Nemo and his submarine, the Nautilus, captured the imagination of the world. It was a very popular character that showed up in other Jules Verne books. It's a book that was ripped off by other fantasy writers. You go to any seminal fantasy sci-fi writer of the late 19th century, early 20th century, they have done a 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea riff. It didn't invent the submarine, but submarines as they existed in the 19th century were very primitive and rudimentary. And as they were imagined by Jules Verne in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, they were kind of fantastic and electric and capable of going to depths and distances that other submarines couldn't. So it was also, I believe, a sort of recurring inspiration to actual engineers who were designing sort of submersible vehicles and stuff like that. So just huge touchstone for ocean fantasy, ocean sci-fi. You can't have any of it without 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the novel from 1870. So decided to call that out. I also wanted to call out in 1916, there was the first feature-length silent film adaptation of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. There were like a real short subject that was inspired by 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea that goes by that title. There's also a George Méliès movie short that was inspired by 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, but it had a different title. I can't recall at the moment. But in 1916, some maniac said, we are going to make that movie. And we're going to learn more about sort of the boondoggle that was the making of The Abyss. But something I really love is that instinct to just like go headfirst into a boondoggle to capture something spectacular on film no one's seen before. It existed in it's always been there, because this film took 2 years to make. It had a $500,000 budget, which, to give some context, in 1915, that was when Birth of a Nation came out, which is an epic 3-hour, historical, incredibly racist. But for our purposes, the relevant part of Birth of a Nation is really big, really epic historical movie that was sort of operating on a scale that very few movies were operating at that time. That movie cost 1/5 of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea from 1916. So this was a really wild project. By the end, it was a popular movie, but not nearly popular enough to justify the budget. And it kind of put the kibosh on people trying to make these kinds of movies for a long time after. The way they did it was a series of watertight tubes and mirrors. So they would have the camera above water photographing an image that was a reflection of what was happening underneath the water.
That's clever.
So, yeah, it was clever. It was very expensive getting the lighting and everything in the, figuring out how to make everything visible so it's not just a murky mess. Focus using that kind of system, all incredibly elaborate, complicated, and expensive. And so no one really did that for a while. There's, people were trying to photograph things underwater. People were experimenting documentary footage of the sea and stuff like that, but trying to sell a big budget fantasy film on the basis of underwater footage, not really a thing for a while. However, we should jump forward ahead to 1954, Creature from the Black Lagoon, the Universal international sci-fi movie that was important in that they had to sort of invent, how is this suit going to work? We have a fully suited person that we're going to see from all angles, and they're going to be swimming in long shots, and they're going to be like turning around, so we can't just have a zipper down the back. And we need the person inside the suit to not drown. So like, again, incredible technical achievement. Also important here is it was a 3D movie. This 1954, I don't think this was the movie that birthed the 3D fad of the 50s, but this was like pretty early on as part of that fad. Mm-hmm. And someone understood just intuitively, like, oh yeah, when you're underwater and you're seeing like the depth and you're seeing bubbles coming towards the camera and stuff, that would all be really good in 3D. And it is. That movie is really beautiful in 3D. I saw it on the big screen with like, red, blue 3D glasses, and it's black and white. So everything's kind of shimmering different colors. And it's a really cool effect. It's a really fun movie. It's a monster movie, underwater monster movie. Not a lot of those before 1954. 1954, also the year that Disney, once again, big boondoggle, they basically bet the farm on 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the Kirk Douglas, Peter Lorre, James Mason vehicle. This was the movie that basically all of their production budget was wrapped up in because they were trying to make Disneyland happen at the time. And basically, if this movie was a bomb, then Disneyland wouldn't have happened. Probably their film production would have shrank dramatically, and you just wouldn't have Disney as we understand it now. Technically, the imagination of like how this, sort of steampunk brass world of this submarine, the Nautilus, is realized, is really spectacular and influential. The giant, we talked about the giant monster movies in 1957, and none of the giant monster movies of 1957, with an exception of like 2 shots in the giant mantis, were trying to build actual giant monsters. They were all, using models and scale and miniatures and stuff, or people in suits. Or claymation. This is a giant squid monster, and the final climactic fight of the giant squid monster in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, incredibly expensive, incredibly difficult to figure out. People were losing their minds trying to get it to happen, but they did, and it's awesome. So if you haven't seen that movie and you have like a Disney Plus or something like that to see it, check it out. It's cool.
Just real quick, I just want to note that movie nearly ruined Disney, and then they sort of went back to the fountain and got nearly ruined by The Black Hole, which is sort of an adaptation in space. That almost ruined them. Atlantis: The Lost Empire, which is sort of an adaptation, animated. Oh, yeah. Also lost the money. And then I think it was Fox tried to do The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which was also a famous flop, which is a sort of fan fiction version of the Captain Nemo Nautilus cruise stuff. It's just a movie. It's just a movie. It's a property that has nearly ruined studios several times.
Yes, but I am bringing up these successes, like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, a big hit, beloved. It's the kind of movie they would re-release. It was the kind of movie that played on TV a lot.
Yeah, a lot.
When you have a movie that's a big hit, like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, it's going to be tempting for other people to try to get in on that.
Yeah.
Speaking of big hits, we can jump ahead to 1975, Jaws.
Yeah,
if you want to talk about water-based horror movies, the 70s were absolutely chock full of them, and it's because the biggest hit of all time, Jaws, at the time when it came out. Jaws is Jaws. I don't need to explain what Jaws is to you, but obviously another movie that was famously a nightmare to shoot because they did it on the water. Really quick, want to tag Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which Spielberg made 2 years later here, because that's going to be very important when we're talking about The Abyss. That's 1977. 1979 is when Alien came out. If you're talking about James Cameron's career, Alien's one of the most important movies, even though he wasn't involved in it. But DeepStar 6 and Leviathan, which we'll be talking about, also hugely indebted to Alien. So I had to bring that up. Then we can sort of briefly get into James Cameron's career before The Abyss, which is to say he started in special effects. He did special effects for Roger Corman movies like Battle Beyond the Stars. He did matte paintings for Escape from New York. He directed Piranha 2 for Roger Corman. He was clearly someone who understood the technical side of filmmaking. But then when he made Terminator in 1984, and that was a massive surprise hit, he sort of announced himself as like a wonderkind. I don't know. It was not the same thing that happened to Spielberg in the 70s, but clearly when James Cameron shows up, you get excited because he's the guy who did Terminator, which came out of nowhere and was a massive hit. He co-wrote Rambo: First Blood Part 2, which was a massive hit. And so when they were going to make a sequel to Alien, they approached him and they said, basically, we want to do Aliens versus Soldiers, go. And James Cameron, most of everything else about Aliens, as far as writing goes, he is one of 3 credited writers, but like Aliens, the film, as it exists now, is pretty much just written and directed by James Cameron. So following up Terminator with Aliens, another like massive hit, and a movie Fox did not want to make because they were convinced that horror had sort of run its course and that it was going to be just a big boondoggle that was going to be way too expensive and lose money. There was like a lawsuit between Walter Hill and someone else and Fox Studios, and part of the settlement of that lawsuit was we get to make a sequel to Alien. And so James Cameron takes the helm of that massive hit. James Cameron can do no wrong. He announces at some point in the next year or two that his next project is going to be The Abyss, a sci-fi movie about deep sea miners, and the land rush starts. This is where everybody starts trying to make The Abyss before The Abyss. And when you talk about why there are all these movies that came out in 1989, it is almost like 201. It is almost all because, and I think some of the movies we'll talk about in part 2 are like more tangentially related in a way that maybe they weren't inspired this way. But these 3 movies that we're talking about, DeepStar 6 and Leviathan, are movies that are chasing after The Abyss. And then the only other thing I want to bring up is that in 1987, Michael Crichton released Sphere, which was a New York Times bestseller. It was the best-selling sci-fi novel of 1987. It was the story of a psychologist who at some point was contacted by the U.S. government to come up with a protocol for dealing with first contact with aliens. And he finds himself brought out to a deep sea oil drilling rig because they found aliens on the bottom of the ocean. And there is an underwater base there. And him and the people that he recommended for this team are sort of brought down to this underwater base where basically 2001: A Space Odyssey happens. They're trying to figure out what's going on with this mysterious shimmering sphere. The dynamic between the military and the scientists and the sort of inherent disaster movie tension of existing in a like high pressure deep sea environment where humans are not meant to be, all of that kind of rings throughout these movies. But I read Sphere for this podcast to make sure that it wasn't ripped off more closely than that, and it was not. I could totally believe that James Cameron read it and it would influence some of the small details and choices that he would make and how he depicts certain things. I don't think anyone who made these movies were like, we should get in on that Sphere money. That is my personal belief. It's also not a very good book. A lot of times you'll read about Sphere and people will be like, it's great. It's great. It's not good. But so I wouldn't necessarily recommend you read it. But I wanted to bring that up because that is part of the stew of influences and context for why all these water sci-fi movies happened in 1989. And it is worth mentioning because it was a successful, high-profile novel.
Yeah, I found, and I didn't write down where I found this, but there's a very brief, I think it was in one of the Starlog magazines, somebody did ask Crichton about this briefly, and he said that he had been approached to make a movie of Sphere, but was not interested because he was too busy trying to make a movie out of Congo, and that fell apart. Noting that there was both a Sphere and a Congo movie after Jurassic Park came out in 93.
Yeah.
And Crichton became the... what do we call it? The airport fiction novelist, like, of all time.
Yes, he was for a stretch of the 90s, for like the first half of the 90s, from like 93 to 97, let's say. He was like the most important author in the popular imagination. But it is worth noting, 1987, he was a name that maybe not the average American knew, but like certainly people in the industry knew. He had books that had been adapted to successful films. He had written successful films. He had directed successful films. You know, he was not an unknown by any means, but he was not Jurassic Park's Michael Crichton yet. So right. It's not necessarily an assumption that like, oh yeah, anything he writes is going to be made into a movie, especially when the movie takes place in an underwater sea base. Yeah. So even though all of these movies were rushing to rip off The Abyss, I don't think any studio was willing to take that same swing to rip off Sphere.
Yeah, or to just like buy the rights outright and try to beat The Abyss to theaters. That never came up either.
Right.
The assumption we're making here is that these people are rushing in to rip off The Abyss, and they are assuming because of aliens that The Abyss is going to be a horror sci-fi film. And it doesn't help that the original tagline on the poster was, he made your heart pound with the Terminator, then he stopped it with aliens. Now, writer-director James Cameron presents the summer's most original adventure. So that was really all they had going. So they're like, oh, this is going to be aliens underwater. So that's kind of where all these filmmakers went.
That's right. This is also a time where the Exxon Valdez oil spill happened after all these movies had been made. That was March of 1989. But like, this was an era where people were interested in, you know, Save the Whales was a popular...
Yeah, there's a whole Star Trek movie about it.
Yeah, sort of liberal slogan. Star Trek 4 is a movie I did not bring up that I could have brought up in terms of things that would have been in people's minds as they're making these films. You know, part of the reason James Cameron decided it was now time to make The Abyss, which is based off of a short story he wrote when he was in high school, is because he saw documentary footage from submarines and was like very excited by what technology would allow him to do now. And so like all of that was all happening that produced The Abyss. Do you want to start off with the sort of the making of The Abyss, how this movie came together?
Yeah, because we're going to go in order after this, but we want to cover The Abyss first, even though it wasn't released until August of 1989. So it was like the third or fourth if we're going chronologically. After this, we'll go chronologically. But yeah, we wanted to start with this one because I think this is going to be the one that most people saw, most people are aware of. It's James Cameron film, so we don't need to do too much. But the making of is very interesting. So yes, we should explore that. And there happens to be a well, not very, but reasonably thorough behind-the-scenes documentary on the original DVD, which was not the norm at the time. This was just a little bit before you were guaranteed some sort of commentary or making of documentary.
And even more unusual, and probably just because it was so publicized that they couldn't sort of, clean it up for PR. It's pretty warts and all, this making of documentary.
Yeah.
Like it's very blunt. I mean, part of what they're selling is, look at what we went through to produce this spectacular thing. Isn't that impressive? But like, part of that selling how impressive it is that they did it is selling that it was like a fucking nightmare to do it. And so the documentary does not shy away from the fact that like the cast was losing their minds, the crew were losing their minds, James Cameron was losing their minds, multiple people almost died. Like, absolutely wild story, the making of The Abyss.
I guess it all just goes back to doing anything underwater is a bad idea. And so most of these other movies didn't really shoot underwater. They would shoot dry for wet, which will come up a whole bunch of times, which is basically means you're shooting sometimes in slight slow motion with lots of fog and smoke effects and pretending to be underwater, or shooting through some sort of water filter of some kind. These days you do it digitally. There is digital effects in this movie, but they were very crude for the time, and you cannot do an entire film that way at the time. My thing is that it feels to me like this movie was partially made just because James Cameron really liked diving, and he is really interested in I know that he said that he had the story since he was in high school, but it just sort of, it feels like a movie built around a rich dude's hobby, and that he knows more about it than anybody, because he really does know a lot about diving. Like, they went after the I can't remember what was the one that exploded underwater recently. Recently being like 4 years ago.
I forget the name of it, but I know, everyone knows what you're talking about.
Yeah, they went to James Cameron to ask him questions, like, for real. Like, he wasn't like promoting an Avatar movie. Like, somebody went, we should ask James Cameron about this, because James Cameron has dove to actually see the Titanic before and not been crushed to death. So he knew what he was talking about, and that makes it more interesting. In fact, it makes it so interesting that I often wonder if I can even trust my opinion on this movie, or is my opinion on just the fact that they pulled this off, is this movie really actually move me, or do I just know that a bunch of people nearly drowned and got into fights with each other, and Ed Harris had to pull over his car and cry for like an hour after a bad day. And I didn't write down the specific every little thing that went wrong, but it's all the stuff you would expect. For some reason, Cameron wanted them to be acting for real underwater and not dubbing their lines, which is a huge problem. So they had to invent a special kind of face shield, and then they had to add all these audio filters, because when you speak underwater, there's this horrible suction sound that happens as you take in a breath, and the regulator punches oxygen into your mask. So it's just creating all these issues. And then they had to find a big enough tank so that it would look like they were truly at the bottom of the ocean, which is something Jaws didn't have to deal with, because nobody gets dragged under the ocean in Jaws. It's all in relatively shallow water. So you can get away with having the camera just below the surface. So they had this massive tank. I don't know if it still holds the record for the biggest tank. It probably doesn't.
Well, the hilarious thing is, it wasn't a tank. It was an unfinished nuclear power plant.
Right.
So it was the tower
tank
of one of the reactors. This isn't a decommission. It never actually was a power plant, but it was basically just like going to a nuclear power plant and crawling inside, which even without it having any nuclear material there ever, it turns out still an equally bad idea.
Yeah. And there's like, it's not made for that much water pressure. Nothing is made for that much water pressure. And it's so big that you actually have to decompress after you've been filming for too long. You can't just swim up to the top and go, all right, have a nice evening, see you tomorrow. Depending on how long you're in there, like they were saying, Cameron had like hours, because he was also doing other stuff underwater. He had to decompress for hours, so that he wouldn't, what's it called? The bends.
Right. Let's see. Part of the things they did, they had to like buy extremely expensive like mini subs. They had to build sets that were sort of looked like the base that they could film inside of underwater. They had to float, I think, like 15 tons of small plastic beads on the surface of the water, so that it was like an inch and a half thick on the surface of the water of black plastic beads. And that was their way, or kind of an ingenious way really, of no light from the top gets through, so it really it's you don't see any like sunlight or anything coming through the surface of the water, so you really do feel like you're like deep ocean, but it also doesn't trap anyone down there because they can surface through the beads. So it's not like a giant tarp or something, which could potentially have drowning issues.
Though they did try a giant tarp, and this first storm that happened, it ripped open.
Yeah, well, the tarp was over the tower.
Over the tower, which just, and the sheer size of that is... They have video of it, and it doesn't really... your brain can't get around to how huge this tarp is. They needed to have like a man stand next to the torn piece of tarp for us to understand how huge it was. Because it looks like a miniature. Because who would do this? Who wouldn't just use a miniature instead?
They basically drained a nearby lake to make it happen. Just like... absolute, like, you know, obviously all of this time to set up, all like none of those actors are getting out of the water to use the bathroom, so they are all just pissing on themselves constantly. Like it was an absolutely wild thing to do. At a certain point, it started leaking. There was just constant issues with communication and like, how are we going to run down all these lights without electrocuting everybody? No one has attempted anything like this since. No one, even when you go back to some of the other expensive aquatic sci-fi boondoggles that I mentioned earlier, no one attempted anything near this at the time. But I will say, so you sort of mentioned, like, I don't know if I actually like this movie or if I just appreciate the incredible amount of work that went into it. The result is, the first time I saw this movie, I was maybe 20 or something. I wasn't a child, but I was pretty, I had seen enough, documentary, DVD, special features, making of, stuff like that. I had a pretty good idea of how sci-fi movies were made, how special effects were achieved and stuff like that. When I watched The Abyss at the time, it never occurred to me to wonder how they did it. I just thought they were at the bottom of the ocean. I just thought, they probably just found a part of the ocean where they can shoot on the bottom, and they did it because the illusion is complete. Like, I watched this movie and I see no seams whatsoever for that stuff. Some of the optical effects, the visual effects of the aliens, some of the CGI at the time, obviously that has aged, but when they are underwater, like going through the sunken submarine and all that, it is just sort of like, they probably just built a submarine and put it underwater.
It's one of those things where I can't believe this didn't cost more than any movie ever made, and I can't believe that modern movies possibly cost more than this. Like, the whole point of digital effects is it shouldn't cost this much. That's not the way it works. But you don't have to build these huge things and put your actors in danger anymore because you have digital effects.
It's the Steven Soderbergh quote about Fury Road, where he's like, there's two things I don't understand about Mad Max Fury Road. One is how they're not all dead, and two is how they're not all still filming it. Yeah. And so, this is a absolutely wild production in service of a film that is not aliens underwater.
No.
It is... I guess it's more like Close Encounters of the Third Kind underwater.
Yep. It's Close Encounters with a little bit of 2001 A Space Odyssey, a little less intellectualized version of 2001 A Space Odyssey, for sure.
Cameron specifically cited The Day the Earth Stood Still as an influence, and it's extremely The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Especially if you watch the longer cut, which I did.
I intended to watch both cuts so I could compare and contrast, and I did not have time, so I just ended up watching the director's cut both times I watched this movie.
I watched. I tried to make notes of what was different, and that it's one of those cases where I would say you almost have to watch the director's cut. I think it's one of those, once you see the longer cut, you can't really go back to the other cut. but you do start to feel that nearly 3-hour length.
Yeah.
So it's like it might actually feel a little too long, but the stuff they cut out is kind of necessary for the film to work, I think. So there needs to be a third cut where they find a nicer balance between those two. But yeah, I would 100%, if you haven't seen this movie, maybe just skip the theatrical cut if you haven't seen it. I think it would be okay, personally.
Yeah. So the plot of the movie, did you have that written out, or I could just sort of?
I didn't. Yeah, you go for
here?
it. I forgot to do that part.
Yeah, the plot of the movie is that there is an American nuclear submarine that has an encounter with an alien entity of some kind that crashes it and ends up sinking at the bottom of the ocean. The military, knowing that the nukes involved need to be retrieved, employ a nearby experimental underwater oil drilling team. So little notes of Armageddon here.
Yeah, Armageddon totally stole the idea of instead of training the army to drill oil, you trained the oil drillers to be the army kind of situation.
Right. Worth noting here, this is not real. No. People have been drilling for oil in the ocean since the late 19th century, but it's always just offshore. It's always very low depths. Deep sea oil drilling, as it exists in 2026, is actually relatively new. I think it's only been around 15 to 20 years or so. So the deep sea oil drilling that we have now was not really a thing in 1989. And deep sea oil drilling is not an underwater base. It's not about people living underwater. It is about building a platform that is on the surface of the water or maybe partially submerged in the water that then goes down to the ocean floor. Right. And I want to bring that up because one of the things that none of these three movies do that I find really interesting is none of them stop to say to the audience, hey, we know that this isn't real, but this is the near future, and it's a sci-fi world where underwater drilling or underwater mining exists, or underwater scientific research bases exist. There was an underwater scientific research base off the coast of Florida that was 30 feet down. Which is basically that's how deep they shot the abyss. So there's no such thing as underwater research bases that exist in DeepStar Six. There's no such thing as moving underwater oil drillers in the abyss, or silver mining in Leviathan. But all of these movies just sort of accept, the audience is ignorant enough that they probably won't question it. They'll probably just buy it because no one understands how oil drilling works. I didn't either. I had to look it up. I took a second. I go, I wonder what these things are really like. And then I thought another second and I said, if they exist. Then I looked it up, and it turns out they do not exist. So that is something I find kind of cool and interesting about these movies, is that they have a sort of core sci-fi conceit that they don't feel the need to justify with a bunch of exposition, which is also true of Alien, really. Alien, they are space truckers, but no one really stops to talk about how they're space truckers. You just kind of glean from the vibes and from tossed off pieces of dialogue here and there that it's oh, okay, I guess they're space truckers.
Yeah.
So anyway, this American nuclear submarine gets buzzed by an alien. It sinks. The military employs these deep sea underwater drillers who are oil men, oil drillers, whatever. They're 20 miles away to go to the site with the Navy SEALs or whoever this military group is that they're with to, investigate the crash site, see what happened. They don't understand that part of the military's goal is to retrieve the nukes because they think that this is a Cold War going hot. They think this is the Russians. But they're all getting triple pay, so they all sign up for it. They get there, they examine the submarine, they find the dead bodies. One of them has an experience where he sees the alien, which is very close encounters. It's just a floating thing made of pure light. The military retrieves all the nuclear codes and information, and their job is done, except that they can't be pulled back to the surface before a hurricane comes because the military has stolen all of their necessary equipment to go back and retrieve the nukes. And so now they are stranded down there for a time, and they learn through their sort of underwater television that during this time they're down there, the rest of the world has learned about this and thinks that this is an American stunt to fire nukes at Russia. And so now it's DEFCON 1 and it's just everyone is going mad. And, Cuba and Russia are threatening America, and the news reporters are interviewing Americans, and the Americans are like, well, I guess nuclear annihilation's here. What are you going to do about it? And meanwhile, the underwater drillers are trying to argue that there's something else down there, something worth exploring that is not the Russians, that is not dangerous. And it becomes sort of a battle of wills between the military and the oil drillers. They have a tension. It escalates. They encounter the aliens who take the form of water they manipulate. This is a big CGI sequence that was done by Industrial Light and Magic that won an Academy Award and sort of heralded the new era of special effects. As much as Jurassic Park is the one that made the entire world go, okay, we're making CGI movies now, The Abyss is the one that made the industry go, okay, we're making CGI movies now.
Yeah. So Cameron follows this up with Terminator 2, which has the liquid metal man who's sort of a liquid water man.
Yes, yeah. This is definitely what leads to the T-1000, this sort of water tentacle that explores the ship. The military starts panicking and is like, well, we got to kill these aliens right now because they have deep sea madness, which is, I don't think, a real thing.
If you don't decompress appropriately, you can have, it's not madness though. It doesn't necessarily make you paranoid, but it can be bad for your brain. So Cameron sort of works that into a deep sea madness as an idea.
Right. So we have so it's classic Day the Earth Stood Still, where we have aliens who, at the very end of the movie, we discover the aliens' goal is to get humans to stop fighting with each other, which is the day the Earth stood still. We have a military who says that's impossible and sees them as a threat. We have civilians who understand that these aliens come for good and are trying to fight with the military to sort of make sure that the aliens are heard and contacted. It ends with giant tidal waves threatening to wipe out the world. This is the director's cut version that I'm describing now. Ed Harris goes deep down to retrieve a nuke that has been robotically sent to destroy the alien ship, and he disarms it, but going that deep essentially is about to kill him. The aliens save him. They show him a montage of tragic war footage that they picked up off of 24-hour cable, which is in 1989 now been around for about a decade. So it's a little bit it's very contemporary. Day the Earth Stood Still has a lot of footage of newsmen reporting on this and sort of the way the media responds to the alien thing. And this updates that to be specifically, here are the images you see in 24-hour news. But
if you did it now, it would be TikTok.
Yes. Yeah.
TikTok and Instagram Reels.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The aliens would see some really good teenagers dancing and be like, you know what? Never mind. Humanity's worth saving.
Yeah, exactly.
But then the thing I didn't mention is Ed Harris is the leader of these drillers, and his wife, his estranged wife, is the developer of the submarine. So she goes down there with them in the military, and they have not been getting along for some time, but they haven't yet got divorced. And through these tense series of situations, they learn they still love each other. And the aliens are like, human love, that's the best thing in the galaxy. We'll say you're okay now. And then the movie ends on a very warm, happy note about how humanity and its capacity for love is ultimately the most powerful force in the galaxy or something. So it's a nice, happy ending there.
The other thing that the director's cut adds is a lot more of the tension between the U.S. and USSR. There's a lot less of that in the shorter cut. And I think you kind of need that existential threat really helps make it work. It feels less like the aliens are rescuing some guy and more like the aliens are deciding not to murder humanity. Watching this movie when it came on the first, because I'd seen it on television when I was a kid, but it finally hit DVD in, I believe, something like 1998. It was one of those early DVDs, and watching it and going, man, the days when we were afraid of nuclear Armageddon, it just doesn't hit the same. And then we're kind of back there again, and it hits again.
Yes. There's one of the people the news interviews is just sort of it's gonna happen or it's not. I just gotta not think about it. And I'm like,
yep.
Dude, fucking same.
Yep.
So a few things about The Abyss. This is the first movie that James Cameron originated, that he wrote, he is the sole screenwriter of. Aliens, he is pretty much the sole screenwriter, but that is like a big studio sequel to a massive studio movie. So you know that there were like tons of meetings and notes and all that. This is James Cameron, unleashed. And the thing about James Cameron as a writer is he's a little naive and a little childish. And this movie, it has that like kind of gooey sentimentality. He's not a bad writer. Like, I think he has a good feel for what a story should have. Like, he makes good choices in terms of like, these people should be blue collar. We should have the core crew of the drilling rig get along with each other so that their antagonists are only the military. So there's this, unlike the other two movies, there's not a lot of like bickering in this movie. And once the military has been dealt with and you see all these people trying to work together to solve this problem, it's like, that's some good shit. And that's the kind of shit that made Aliens successful, is like people really responded. I don't like them as much as a lot of people, but like people really responded to the Marines in the Aliens and how they interacted with each other. And he has a good
For me,
feel
it's
for like,
when things go bad. The beginning, the Marines are dinguses. And when things go bad and we figure out which Marines are people worth caring about, that's what I like about it.
Yeah.
And I also, from that standpoint, I like that Michael Biehn plays the bad guy in this one, because he's like the only definitively good Marine in Aliens. He's like, the other Marines are much more volatile or maybe even stupid. So he's also the good guy in Terminator. He was just sort of the good guy in all those things. And seeing him play this sort of simmering psychopath actually really works for me.
Yeah, I think James Cameron is good with actors. I think that's a thing that people don't really talk about, especially once his actors started to be motion captured, and then that didn't matter anymore. And but I think when you look at Aliens, when you look at Terminator, when you look at The Abyss, he is not a George Lucas type who has an idea of like what a sci-fi movie can be, but no idea what people are like. I think the performances, the central performances especially, I think Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio and Ed Harris and Michael Biehn are all really, really good. Harris is so good in this movie.
Oscar caliber in this movie. I think if it would have been a bigger hit, there probably would have been a pretty good campaign for him. That's something we didn't bring up. This wasn't a massive hit, but this also didn't technically lose money. This was like middle ground level hit.
That's right.
Which made it a little funnier that all these other movies were trying to rip it off when it didn't end up being the blockbuster of the summer.
The other, at the very least, DeepStar 6 and Leviathan both lost money.
Yes, I think the other ones we're going to cover in part 2 are so low budget that it doesn't really matter. But yes, the other two budget ones lost money.
Obviously, when you think about Ed Harris now and you like look back on his career, there's just so many military men. There's so many like hard-edged, like blue-collar guys. The idea that he's in charge and barking out orders to all of, this like big masculine energy and all that. It's very easy to imagine like that side of this character. The other thing about Ed Harris in this movie is that he is really emotionally vulnerable. His estranged wife showing up is kind of sending him in a tailspin because he really loves her and he doesn't want to admit it. And he's kind of vulnerable around her. And when they have the encounter with the water tendril, his face lights up. Like he has access to something like really pure and childlike that you may not expect Ed Harris capable of if you only know him from like the stuff he was doing in the 90s and the 2000s.
Yeah, for sure.
Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio also just like when she's the first one to sort of encounter the aliens and to be sort of their advocate in terms of like something miraculous is happening down here and trying to convince everyone else about it. And she has that aspect of her as well, where like she just has like pure wonder and warmth and joy for the idea of contacting these aliens. And there's a really big swing later when there's a scene where she is drowned and Ed Harris is trying to bring her back. And Ed Harris is getting more and more angry as everyone is, they got the paddles on her and they're giving CPR and everything. And she's just not coming back. And everyone else has sort of accepted that she died. And he is getting more and more heated and upset and trying to bring her back. At a certain point, he just like screams, "God damn it, you bitch. Like you never gave up on anything in your life." And like, he like slaps her unconscious body.
That was apparently behind the scenes a little bit like she was okay with the slapping, but they kept doing more and more takes, and then she was not cool with it.
When you talk about the nightmare aspects of it, one of the nightmare scenes to shoot was this CPR scene where she obviously, because they're putting the electrodes on her chest for the
you have to have skin to skin contact for the
EKG, not EKG, that reads waves. At any rate, she was basically topless and in this like really physical situation where she's getting her chest pushed in and getting screamed at, and it's like cold and wet, and having to do take after take of that, just absolutely grueling. But like that choice to have him like call her a bitch because he's just getting so frustrated and angry and slap her, like that. It's so unexpectedly moving to me. I don't think it should work, but it does.
This movie, the Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio character is interesting because she has a very she's based in a very misogynistic sort of caricature, but Cameron cares about the character, and her performance is so good that it sort of flips it on its head. But we're introduced to her like she gets off the plane and she has high heels, if I'm remembering correctly. And so there's like all these things, and then everybody else on the rig doesn't like her because she broke the heart of their best friend there. But she quickly recreates her rapport with all of them, and it's just sort of like. I think that it really turns that on its head. But then there's also the fact that Cameron has said that he based this character on Gail Ann Hurd, who he was currently getting a divorce with during the making of the film. And so there was always something in the back of my head that's like how much of what Cameron's putting into this character and is him trying to save his own marriage. And it's kind of an uncomfortable thing, but it's one of those things where I feel like if a younger person is a little more sensitive to these misogynistic tropes watches this movie the first time, for the first however many, like half of the quarter of the movie, they're going to think of this character as a bad character, a problematic character, and I think they bring her out of it really well.
Yeah, I think everyone around her resents her because she has status over them because she designed the ship. She is like more important in this company than they are. And they are these like roughnecks who have this like very like, you have to earn that leadership. You have to earn that respect. And you just invented some doohickey or whatever. Yeah. And because we don't know enough we have not really spent any time with her before we get everyone else's opinion of her, it's very easy to assume that the movie's opinion is theirs. But yeah, James Cameron and gender, very interesting that we can't get into in too much depth
that
here,
would be the rest of the podcast.
But he has a extremely binary understanding of gender, which is like the movie from 1989. Of course he does. He's a straight man. Of course he does. I'm not gonna, whatever. Yeah. But like he has this. It's a different brand of misogyny where it's like men are aggressive and violent and quick to conflict, and women are emotional and sensitive and nurturing. And so like he plays with women and men in a lot of his movies using these kind of like gender essentialist assumptions. And this is a movie where like literally at some point they have oxygenated saline that Ed Harris breathes, which by the way is a real thing.
Is a real thing and does work. And was a real thing in 1989 or 88 when they filmed this.
One of the craziest things that happened in this movie is that to demonstrate the liquid oxygen that you can breathe. And the idea is that because it's a liquid and not a gas, it gives your lungs more structure so that under high pressures, your lungs don't collapse and you actually have the ability to breathe. So that's why it's invented, and that's why Ed Harris breathed it later on. But like they first demonstrated at the beginning of the movie by just trapping a mouse underwater and watching it like a rat underwater and watching it like squirm and like struggle and freak out as this liquid enters its lungs. And the way they did that was they just actually got the liquid and they actually submerged a rat, and it's not drowning it because it can breathe oxygen, but it's waterboarding it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
you're making it experience drowning.
If you are a more sensitive viewer, that might be a scene that is unpleasant to watch, despite the fact that by all accounts the rat was fine at the end of it.
The rat survived, and they gave it a shot to prevent, because the main thing that this causes is pneumonia. They gave it a shot to help prevent pneumonia.
Right, but it does suffer to do it. And then later on, Ed Harris has to breathe this to go down deep to retrieve the nuke. And he starts panicking because he's taking liquid into his lungs, and his just sort of body's instinct is to panic. And one of the things they say to him is like, look, you breathed liquid for 9 months. Like
in the womb.
They tie this liquid oxygen back to the womb, back to being a fetus and all that. And then when he goes down into this sort of alien spaceship sort of a thing, there's that imagery continues. And there is this idea of being like reborn and people being sort of brought back to their like primal, their most essential selves.
Yeah, it's 2001. It's a space baby, or what do they call it? I can't remember what they call the space baby.
Star Child?
Star Child, yes. Space Baby's the Italian ripoff of the Star Child baby.
Yeah. Star Child is also Kiss, though, so I understand why you would reject that when that phrase hits your mind at first. So anyway, there's some gender stuff going on here. James Cameron is interested in it, and generally speaking, this is a liberal movie about nuclear disarmament, and it's an anti-war movie, and he is a filmmaker who is interested in like, I'm going to have a black woman in this cast, and the black woman is going to be like a country and western gal. And that's her, that's her characterization, is that she loves country music and she's always wearing overalls and a cowboy hat.
She's like the most blue collar of the entire crew, actually. Like her whole job is to drive a little truck.
That is something that James Cameron is interested in doing. When you go back to Aliens, the way he depicts gender and race, he is interested in a sort of diverse group of heroes that buck stereotypes. So I don't want to say that like, because he thinks men are from Mars and women are from Venus, then this is like a misogynist movie at its core.
No, that's what I was trying to make sure.
It's complicated.
It is complicated, and it's a she comes in as misogynistic trope. And I think they turn that on their head without being like, hey, look at us, we're turning this on their head. I think it's pretty subtle. I like it. That said, talking about the liberal part, in my brain, because of the Avatar movies, which I've only seen one, I always remember this as being an environmental movie too, but it is absolutely not. Master Antonio's character isn't interested in environmental science. She's trying to prove you could drill for oil underwater, which is extremely unfriendly to the environment. And I completely forget that every time I watch it, like every, 7-8 years, and I go, oh yeah, these are oil drillers. These are not environmentalists.
Right. It doesn't open with Ed Harris hitting golf balls at Greenpeace, but it's it's not an environmentalist movie.
Yeah.
I think James Cameron, True Lies being an incredibly noteworthy exception, James Cameron's instincts are to go to like some very easy, underhanded pitch liberal ideals. And I think that they play better here than they do in Terminator 2, like the little scenes in Terminator 2 about like, the war, it's nature, mankind's nature to kill itself. All that stuff is like a little more eye-rolly. But it is like, there's something naive about it. Like, this is not, it's hard sci-fi in a way, but it's not 2001: A Space Odyssey. It is not.
Also, I want to mention.
Yeah, go ahead.
Cameron, how much he loves Chekhov's gun theory in this movie. This movie has Chekhov's steel wedding ring, so Harris won't take off his wedding ring, even though they're supposed to be getting divorced. And because it's made of steel, it actually holds a automatic door open so that he doesn't get the door closed on him and drown. And then we have Chekhov's pink breathing liquid, as you said, that they show the rat breathing so that when Ed Harris has to breathe, which he didn't, by the way, he just held his breath in pink water because they weren't sure if it was safe enough for him to act through the actual stuff. And then they have Chekhov's former boxer's fists when they mention one character used to be a boxer, and he's like, for no real apparent reason, talks about how he could knock somebody out, and then later he does knock somebody out.
Yeah, James Cameron's instincts are hacky.
They're hacky. I used to resent it. I've seen enough nonsensical shit in the past 10 years that it was kind of nice to go back to. It was kind of nice to go back to that kind of structured, like 3 acts. We have to introduce the thing before we use the thing. Like it's hacky, but now I don't know. It felt better this time around.
Yeah, I really hate Avatar. I saw it for the first time like 2 years ago on the big screen in 3D, and I was like, well, I'm glad I don't know why I waited. That was not worth it. I think that movie sucks, and that's hacky, and like all the reasons I hate that movie are its hackiness. But generally speaking, I like James Cameron's work. Even when it is sort of like playing it safe and by the numbers and being a little hacky. The other thing about this movie, and this is something that's true about all these movies, that I don't know, I'm not an expert on box office. I'm not an expert on the industry and audience taste and all that. But like something about this movie is when you are watching, like part of the reason the pacing is so off and it feels so slow and it's like kind of not as satisfying as some other James Cameron movies that are just like really immaculately structured is because he's really taking his time to show you we're underwater. We're going to hold these shots a long time. We're going to move the camera in a way that we wouldn't be able to if they weren't underwater. We're going to have the, like these sequences go on and on and on because they were hard fought sequences, and he's not going to cut them down. He is going to let you appreciate all the fucking hard work that went into it. So like when you are watching the movie, it's spectacular. Any individual shot is someone in a weird looking scuba suit surrounded by blackness, or it's someone inside of a weird, dark, dingy, corrugated steel environment that's really claustrophobic, because this movie, more than the other two we're going to be talking about in this part, this movie really captures the claustrophobia of like what actual ships are like and what underwater vessels have to be to survive and all that. I can't imagine that when you see a trailer, when you see all this cut for a TV commercial or a trailer, you're necessarily like getting really excited about the prospect, because it just kind of looks like drab and dreary. And I wonder if none of these movies were successes, because all of these movies, every shot they would have to pull for the trailer is like kind of just like, oh, that kind of seems uncomfortable. Like, I don't like, that's not a fantasy I want to go and spend time in. When you're looking at like the highest grossing movies of 1989, it's Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. It's Batman. It's like Ghostbusters 2. It's like movies that are like bright and imaginative and colorful, and they're not too concerned about realism or anything like that. And then you get to this movie, Back to the Future 2, also just like using special effects to do like eye-popping, fun, cartoonish kind of things. And then this movie, you're just sort of like, oh, that kind of seems like not how I want to spend my summer. So I wonder if like ultimately this was always going to be a hard sell, because even when you look at the interiors of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea from the 50s, it's like colorful and it's vibrant, it's Technicolor, and everything is all steampunk and there's all these greens and golds and there's all this like nature footage from the surface of the water, and like inherently making a movie that takes place underwater is making a movie that is not going to like catch an audience's eye. I wonder, because I remember after Titanic, he made a documentary, Ghosts of the Abyss or something like that. And I remember seeing like the poster and a trailer for it and thinking like, that seems miserable. Like that seems like a miserable movie to sit and watch, because it's like almost like sensory deprivation being that deep underwater.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what you said, I'll say one thing. Like all those movies that tried to rip this off got it wrong by thinking it was a horror movie. But you're right. It's the only one that really feels claustrophobic. And the idea of underwater horror should have that claustrophobic element. And it's something that when you're trying to pitch an adventure movie, it definitely is not as, maybe, I don't know, maybe that's why all these movies were trying to be horror movies. I still think that they just thought that they were remaking Aliens under the water, but
they're also like, when you're looking at movies that are like naval movies, submarine movies, they're not to the Abyss audience. An Abyss a movie of that budget,
not Hunt for Red October is not for the same audience as this. That's
the Abyss has to be for everybody. Because it is a super expensive summer sci-fi entertainment. A Das Boot is not as expensive to make, and therefore can be like, this is going to be a big hit for the people who are going to go see a Das Boot or a Hunt for Red October. Well, Hunt for Red October was an everybody went and saw it movie.
It was based on a popular book. Back to the whole Michael Crichton being the king of airport novels.
We didn't mention this when we were talking about context or whatever. 1989 is also the year of the Disney Renaissance with Little Mermaid.
Yeah. So there you go. Somebody wanted to have an underwater movie.
Right. It's like if it doesn't have Under the Sea, we're not interested.
Are they singing? No, then fuck off.
Yeah, exactly. The least claustrophobic movie ever. Little Mermaid.
One that makes the ocean look open and colorful. I have just a couple more notes just on this movie. The one is I kind of forgot how movies used to rest on the idea that the main characters are separated or divorced and the audience is hoping they're going to get back together, but we don't really have any context. We don't know why they're getting divorced. That there was so many, especially movies aimed at kids, and even though it isn't a great movie, I always appreciate the movie Ant-Man for ending with, we're going to have this, the divorce still went through, I'm still married to this other man, but we're still going to have a family together. It's a really good ending for a movie that's ostensibly aimed at children, I think.
I'm trying to remember. You are correct, and I'm like struggling to come up with examples. I guess like thinking about the movies I grew up watching, like on video and stuff like that. I had movies like Hook and Jurassic Park 2. I guess Hook is more about him being a good dad than being a good husband, but like Jurassic Park 2 is like, oh, something didn't work between these two, but it could.
Yeah, and Twister, if I remember right, Twister, the two are estranged and coming back together over the it's actually kind of similar to The Abyss now I think about it. She's the one who's invented the thing. I think it wasn't even just divorce, but it was just like a couple that has to come back together for some sort of adventure was just something they did in the late 80s and 90s.
Yeah, that's also Raiders.
Yep. I also want to note the thing that's going to come up in multiple of these movies, but that I really remember from the movie Deep Blue Sea is the idea that the underwater facility is in danger because there's a hurricane on the surface. Like that becomes a really easy way of saying they can't go back up. And I feel like it seems doubtful that Cameron invented that, but I can't think of anything before The Abyss where that's the reason they can't go up.
Well, that happens in Sphere.
That does happen in Sphere. Okay, so maybe Cameron took that. Maybe that was the one thing Cameron's like, oh, this is a good idea.
Yeah, these are disaster movies. In some, even the ones that have monsters in them are like disaster movies where there's a monster. And a lot of the things that the characters have to overcome have nothing to do with the monster. And so like you need a reason for them to be stuck.
I have a thing that I think I coined. I probably didn't. That I was calling frying pan movies. This was when I was a kid, and it's the idea of you go out of the frying pan into the fire over and over and over and over again. And Deep Blue Sea is the ultimate version of this, where every time they overcome an obstacle, a worst obstacle happens. And that's something that's in a lot of disaster movies, but it's also something that's in these movies where when they're done right, if one thing goes wrong, that means another thing goes wrong. So you have to. Most of the movie is people trying to figure out ways out of a situation that keeps getting worse. And I like to call them frying pan movies. Maybe that will catch on someday if I keep mentioning it. Dick Warlock is in this. I don't know who he is. He's one of the army guys on the boat, I'm guessing. But Dick Warlock was he only one? Was he only Michael Myers in the second movie? Or did he play multiple Michael Myerses?
I don't know.
He was at least one. He was at least one. Mostly a stunt guy, but I just like his name. Dick Warlock is a great name. Alan Silvestri.
Todd.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say real quick. Speaking of other people in the cast, Todd Graff. When I didn't mention this before when I was talking about like an ideal of James Cameron's being like a diverse group of heroes. Todd Graff plays Hippie, and Hippie is coded as gay, but they can't quite bring themselves to make him a gay character, but Todd Graff, who plays him, is a gay actor, and I think he knew what was up, and he brings that to the character without hitting any stereotypical mannerisms or anything. You just watch this movie and I just always assume like, oh yeah, and Hippie's gay, and no one mentions it because it's not important.
See, for me, since I'm not queer, I just noticed that he listened to the ska, two-tone ska classic "Too Much Pressure" from the Selector. So I just he was ska coded for me, not gay coded.
Right. Look, we all have multiple identities. He is ska before he is gay.
I'm sure they picked "Too Much Pressure" for the irony of its lyrics, though, not because Cameron was a fan of the Selector. That song would have been eight years old by then, I think. But the other song that they play, there's only two songs in this movie. There's a great Alan Silvestri score. He kind of rips off his own Predator themes a couple times, but it's still a good score. But there's a song called Willing by Linda Ronstadt. And in the song, Linda Ronstadt, who grew up in Tucson, Arizona, mentions Tucson, Arizona. There's our first Tucson connection. Tucson mention, beep, 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 beep. My school bus stop was in front of what I was told was Linda Ronstadt's parents' house.
Oh, that's
they
fun.
might have been lying to me, but I'm always going to say it was. All right, that's all I got on that. What do we have anything else? We already went longer than I thought, but I feel like we got
you
to
mentioned
the point.
Alan Silvestri at this point was a very acclaimed composer. This score is perfectly fine. It's not one of the memorable ones to me.
No, it just works. It works. It's not you can't hum the theme. I have no memory of what the theme is, but it works for feeling wise. Yeah.
Mikael Solomon was the cinematographer. He was a Danish cinematographer. This was sort of his, not the first movie he made in America, but this is early in his American career. And when I was looking up the crew of The Abyss, something I discovered is that unlike Leviathan and DeepStar Six, a lot of people who had a lot of experience and a lot of success especially in the world of special effects, but cinematography as well, were not working on The Abyss as much as they were working on DeepStar Six and Leviathan. Yeah. And I think part of that is because when you are signing up to do The Abyss, you are signing up for question mark amount of time, for years maybe to make this film. And if you are spending years working on The Abyss, you are spending years not working on other movies. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the people who worked on The Abyss in these crew roles, in these, costumes and makeup and special effects to a certain extent, they were not the people who had done all of the horror, sci-fi, and monster movies of the 80s. They were people who had relatively little experience and were sort of getting their first shot to be on a big movie with The Abyss. And so this cinematographer shot The Abyss. Being a cinematographer for The Abyss may be one of the worst jobs ever.
Yeah.
But he does a good job. The movie looks great. He shot Always by Steven Spielberg the same year, which is if I had to think of a movie that looked the exact opposite of The Abyss, it would be Always by Steven Spielberg.
Yeah, and you have to shoot in the sky, too, because there's airplanes in that movie.
That's right. He shot Fire because he was the cinematographer for Backdraft.
There's also Fire in Always. Always is about firefighters. Oh, my God. He's in Earth, Wind, and Fire and Sea.
And he went on to be a director of some movies, including the 1998 Christian Slater flooding thriller Hard Rain, where someone is doing a bank robbery during the middle of a hurricane. So that is a movie that is just sets flooded with water that seems like it would be a logistical nightmare to make. And turns out if you have made The Abyss, nothing can scare you.
Yeah.
So he went on to direct that. I thought that was notable.
All right, you ready for DeepStar 6 yet?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
This is all going to go a lot faster, I think.
Yeah.
DeepStar 6 and Leviathan, not nearly as much to talk about in terms of the productions.
No.
The movies, really.
DeepStar 6, this one beats them all to theaters January 13th, 1989, quite early in the year. What's that, the second or third weekend in January? This is directed by Sean S. Cunningham. And I don't think this will come as a shock or a hot take, but I think Sean S. Cunningham isn't a very good filmmaker.
True.
I think he's a good producer, and I think he knows what he's doing, but he's too mercenary. He's just not creative. He's just sort of there. And every interview,
I might argue he's not a good producer. When you see because at a certain point, Friday the 13th was out of his hands.
That's true.
And that was when the franchise took off. And then at a certain point, it was back in his hands. And that was when it all collapsed.
When it all became shit. You're right. You know what? Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you there. I found some interviews in some old Fangoria's Gore Zones and Starlog magazine and Cinema Fantastique. Is that whatever? And he outright admits that he was trying to beat specifically Leviathan to the market. He never mentions The Abyss, but he says that he learned Leviathan was being made and he pushed everything ahead to get this out first. And he keeps claiming, unprompted, mind you, in every interview, that he started making this movie in September of 1987. I don't know if I believe him. I think there's a lot of reasons not to believe anything Sean S. Cunningham says. But that's his story, and he was sticking to it. And it got to the point where Cameron became aware, and there was going to be a Abyss teaser trailer that he decided to pull because he was afraid that there would be confusion between DeepStar Six and The Abyss.
He didn't want to accidentally advertise a Sean S. Cunningham movie.
Exactly.
Sean S. Cunningham is the exact kind of filmmaker who would offend James Cameron's sensibilities.
Yeah.
The idea that anything he would do would be anything like Sean S. Cunningham would do would just be disgusting. Because, he's worked on John Carpenter movies. He's worked on Roger Corman movies. He's not above genre films, above low budget films or stuff like that. But like Sean S. Cunningham is a different kind of a thing that James Cameron is much better than.
Sean S. Cunningham is just ambition, and even then he doesn't have a lot of ambition. I guess in case nobody's clear, Sean S. Cunningham directed the first Friday the 13th, and he produced Last House on the Left. I think he produced Porn too.
That's right.
So he is, he's just mercenary. He just strikes me as someone who doesn't
serves a market.
care. Yeah.
He wants to serve a market. He saw Bad News Bears was a hit, so he did that twice. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
There is a real lack of love when you watch a Sean S. Cunningham movie.
Yeah.
I like the first Friday the 13th movie. It's not one of the best slasher movies of that era, but like it is a movie I like. I like The New Kids, which is a very weird, semi-horror thriller with James Spader. I like DeepStar Six. I like this movie. This might be the best Sean S. Cunningham movie. If only because all of the factors around it just having such a much larger budget meant that he had to pay more attention and take more care than he normally does. Because it is not The Abyss. It is not a $45 million movie, but it is
it's still a high B picture,
Right. Is this Carol Co. is the corporation, the studio that put this out. Carol Co. at this point, 1989, and then especially in the early 90s, was really making a push to be like a competitor to Hollywood studios. And so this was them trying to get in on that. And they hired really good special effect, like proven special effects teams and special effects makeup teams and all of that. They built giant sets that were flooded with water. Some of the movies we'll be talking about in part 2 of this podcast, they do not do that. They do not do that. The water is somewhere else and the actors are over there and never the twain shall meet. And but this is a movie where they had to put a lot of effort to make it come together. And I think that means that Sean S. Cunningham couldn't kind of just crap it out and say, yeah, good enough. Also, I like that DeepStar Six is sort of an unreimagined, unupdated. It's not a postmodern in any way. Unreconstructed is maybe the word I'm looking for. Monster movie. It is a monster movie from the 50s, kind of in the late 80s. It has no ambitions about having ideas. It has no ambitions about pushing the envelope in any way. It's kind of just very satisfied to be a monster movie, which is in some ways comes across as lazy at times, but then in other ways it just is like, oh man, this is just really working for me. I like monster movies.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to mention this later, but when the monster does show up, it is sort of just the crab people from the Roger Corman movie we covered. It's just an updated version of the crab people.
You never get a good look at the whole monster, but I was sort of thinking of it as like an undersea crustacean, kind of like the monster that challenged the world. I was kind of thinking of it as like a big segmented worm of some kind. Yeah. But I guess it has a tail or it has claws or something.
It does sort of have crab claws. I'm going to say the plot real quick because this one doesn't have a particularly interesting plot. The crew of an experimental underground nuclear base are forced to struggle for their lives when their explorations disturb a creature who threatens to destroy the base. So I don't like this movie. I've tried to like this movie. I've watched it at least twice. I find it incredibly inert. And I think that maybe if it was a black and white monster movie, I would not feel that way because there's something about the feel of the 50s that I like. But I just find it just so Like, it feels like every scene is they didn't have enough script, so they just are asking the actors to improvise, and the actors are not prepared to improvise. The cast is surprisingly good. This will come up with Leviathan, but this movie is so heavily ripping off Alien that it doesn't have, like, I like Alien ripoffs, but it doesn't have the outrageousness of something like Galaxy of Terror or Forbidden World or Contamination. It's just it feels like too much of a normal movie to get away with being an Alien ripoff to me.
Despite it coming from Sean S. Cunningham, the guy who directed Friday the 13th, this is not about like building up to a big gory kill.
No,
there's the violence is pretty restrained in this movie.
Yeah, these interviews are great because the Starlog interview, they actually coupled Leviathan and DeepStar Six into one article, which I thought was
worth noting. This isn't one of these things that people look back on and go, "Huh, it's weird that all those movies came out around the same time. I wonder what happened." At the time, everyone was talking about,
they're like,
"Oh God, it's another underwater monster movie. What's happening?"
Yeah, and so it's so funny because Cunningham's interview and his film had already come out by the time of this interview, and it was a huge critical flop and financial flop. So I feel like he kind of felt like the jig was up, and he's already kind of being defensive. But his biggest interview is, if you think that our Drive for Wet photography looks so okay, then we succeeded. We're not trying to show off. And it's like, okay, buddy. Not trying to show off. Okay, like, way to sell your film. It's gonna come out on a home video. You gotta have people still watch this,
and throw your special effects team who had to work extremely hard to make your movie happen, like, under the bus.
Yeah, and he says he didn't read the Leviathan or Abyss scripts because he didn't want to be influenced, which to me verifies that those scripts were around and people could read them and rip them off. I'm guessing the Italians and the Spanish Z-grade filmmakers couldn't pull that off, but maybe anybody who was working in LA or Hollywood. I think he's sort of giving up the deets that he's not supposed to be giving up when he says that. Yeah, I have all these notes on why this is like the Alien to me, and I think that there are two female leads, and they're both Ripley coded. One is the first movie Ripley, who is the voice of reason, and the other one is second movie Ripley, who is a protective heroine. I think they just divided two Ripleys. The cast is introduced in its complete state over a shared meal on their space. Their spaceship is very much the same way we're introduced to the cast in Alien.
And Leviathan.
Yeah, and I was when we got to Leviathan, I was going to say, here we are again, around a table. Yeah, so like that's something that for some reason when you rip off Alien and you're a Hollywood movie, that's a scene that becomes really important to you. And I can understand why a screenwriter would feel that way. Like, you watch that movie, you're like, what's the essence of this movie? It's that we introduced to all these blue-collar guys around a dinner table. They have several scenes where they're locating the monster via sonar beats, which is very both Alien and Aliens. They are underwater. That's a good excuse to do the Aliens thing, but it's very coded like that. There's final act is all characters that are armed, creeping through corridors with the ultimate goal of getting off the station before a nuclear explosion takes out the whole area, which is basically both Alien when she gets the ship into self-destruct, and Aliens when they are planning on blowing up the whole planet and they have to get off of it. And then the coda is the same of both movies, where they think, and Alien Resurrection, where they think they've gotten clear of everything, but the monster has followed them. And I find it funny that it also kind of mirrors the ending of Friday the 13th, having like one last scare, when in fact Cunningham was stealing the ending of Friday the 13th from Carrie.
Right.
The final scare.
This movie, that ending is shot identically to Friday the 13th, where it cuts into a close-up and goes into slow motion as Harry Manfredini has those string section come in. I want to talk about Harry Manfredini for a second, because big part of why I like this movie is Harry Manfredini's score. It's a little schizophrenic, but something that Harry Manfredini is doing that doesn't necessarily clash with the movie, but it sort of adds a layer that didn't exist in the movie or the script, which is Harry Manfredini is totally doing 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Let's have an underwater magical adventure. He has always been really influenced by Jerry Goldsmith. His most famous score is obviously Friday the 13th, and the Friday the 13th score is very, very influenced by Psycho, which you could probably guess, but also the Jerry Goldsmith score Tacoma, which has a lot of the way that Manfredini mixes strings and synths and does like stabbing strings and stuff is very Coma. And there's just a lot of Jerry Goldsmith in Harry Manfredini scores. And here he is doing like maximum, like optimistic, enchanted imagination Jerry Goldsmith sections that are like really lovely. I just want to like, it just makes me happy. And then that combined, like the way we're introduced to this underwater base is these utterly unconvincing miniatures that the way they are kind of decided to shoot the movie is they just kind of slightly overexposed all the underwater scenes and then a little bit out of focus, and just everything has a glow to it. So everything kind of just looks like a painting. It doesn't look like they're shooting anything underwater. It looks like a sci-fi novel's cover of what a book about an underwater base would look like. It's really lovely. And that those matte paintings and those miniatures and the way they shoot all of the models of the submarines and stuff in those wide shots combined with Harry Manfredini's score is just sort of like, it makes me feel good in a way that is not really what this movie is like or about. This movie is about like people fucking setting up nuclear missile launch sites. There's not really any wonder or like joy of the ocean to this movie, but it's there in the score and in the miniatures. But Harry Manfredini is schizophrenic because whenever he realizes that he's scoring a horror movie and has to do a horror scene, it is just Friday the 13th. Yeah. It is unbelievable how he is just doing the string sections from Friday the 13th when like something bad happens. And so when that monster pops up at the end of the movie and it's shot identical to Jason popping up at the end of Friday the 13th, the string sections are also identical to Friday the 13th.
Yeah. I want to go back to complaining though. So
yeah, go ahead.
So much of this runtime is devoted to characters, this improv thing I was talking about, that part of me wonders if they finished the film and the special effects that they had to budget for, and they realized they were like 30 minutes short of a feature-length film, and so they used all their outtakes. There's an interview with the writer, and I think you said that one of the writers was absolutely brutal on the commentary track.
Yeah. Louis Abernathy, who you probably best know as the fat guy with the beard at the beginning of Titanic, who's sort of explaining to Old Rose how they think the Titanic sunk. He has done some acting in his career. He's had a very weird career. If you look at his IMDb profile, it's like he wrote DeepStar Six, and he acted in 2 James Cameron movies, and he was a firearms supervisor for a direct-to-video action movie. Like, whatever. But on the commentary track on the Blu-ray of this movie, he is just talking about how much this movie sucks. And I think he thinks he's being self-deprecating, but he's also just complaining about the special effects and the cinematography and the acting too. Yeah,
and I don't want to necessarily get down on that stuff, but it does feel like the final half hour of this movie, like so nothing happens for 45 minutes basically, and then the final half hour is the movie you want to see, and it moves really quick. And I feel like that they really thought that this was going to fill a whole hour, and they only had 30 minutes, so they were going and trying anything they could to pad out the runtime, because that's what it feels like. And the writer in the interview I saw, I don't remember if it was Abernathy or the other writer, says that they wrote the script to be low budget, and then the budget kept on going up, so they had to keep adding things to it to justify the budget. And I think that also makes me think that they just didn't have a feature-length movie here, and they were doing everything they could to fill it out.
So I don't necessarily think that there's a lot of improvisation or outtakes or anything in this movie, but I think something that Sean S. Cunningham has done in the past and does in this movie, and he would do immediately after this movie for Jason Goes to Hell, is he likes to save money by just hiring some young people who he can tell what to do. And if they are talented or if they are not talented, it's less important than they are desperate for a job and will just do what he tells them to. And also they are people who have no power in the industry. So when things don't go wrong, things don't go well, he can throw them under the bus, which is what he does for the writer-director of Jason Goes to Hell. So Louis Abernathy and Jeff Miller, who wrote the screenplay, were fresh out of USC. They were fresh out of film school. They had made a short or two together, but this is their first professional movie together. And it's very clear that Sean S. Cunningham hired them, said, hey, James Cameron is doing The Abyss. We want to do Alien Underwater that comes out before this. You have to write this really quickly because we have to start building sets and monsters and special effects and all that. So like, just do one of these. And they don't have any real strong ideas, and they don't have a lot of experience. And so everything is sort of the most generic version of the thing it is. And the other thing is just like, if you're not doing The Abyss, if you're not spending $45 million, like The Abyss is, let's say 6 times more expensive than this movie, 5 times more expensive than this movie, then you have to be thoughtful about, okay, when do we deploy the monster? When are we going to see the monster? Because special effects shots are expensive and special effects gags. Every individual shot with a creature in it has to be worked out, and that's expensive. So we are going to just sort of put all that at the end of the movie. And I think a better screenwriter or a better pair of screenwriters would say, so let's do something interesting and let's find ways to have like tension before that. And this movie's just very leisurely getting to the monster part.
There is no urgency. Like there's an early scene where there's 2 characters, they are falling in love with each other, and the woman is in trouble, and the man is just joking with his friends. Like they're like, okay, cool, let's just. I mean, there's just no urgency. There's so many points in the early part of the film that you could have a lot of suspense that they just don't milk it. It feels more like an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, where we're meant to be involved in the characters solving the problem more than the threat of death. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they are. I mean, one of the things I like about this movie is also why it's not very exciting for the first hour, which is I like that this is sort of an underwater base that has a mix of funding, where it's like it's partially funded by the military, but there's a marine biologist who has like hopped on this program, so she can, so it's like you get the idea that it's like this is the military's in charge, but she's the one who is. She got her college that she works at or whatever is paying to have her go and do research for 6 months or 9 months. How long are they on the?
I'm getting it confused with Leviathan because Leviathan has an actual countdown, doesn't it? Like they're like one more day.
Leviathan's like we're 3 days to retirement. We have 3 days till our shift ends. This movie is same setup except it's like we've been down here for 6 months, I think. Something like that. So anyway, I like that there's all these little like cliques and little like groups, and like they are all co-workers, but they don't all necessarily, like they're not all deeply involved with each other. And as this movie for the first hour just kind of like strings out its premise and its characters, you get a feel for like the complicated office politics of this underwater base. And all the like little resentments, but it's not necessarily just like people being assholes to each other all the time. It's like a little more, I guess, less tense than that. It's the thing. It's a little more nice. It's that Next Generation thing, where no one is, Miguel Ferreira is a prick, but he's not necessarily like, we'll get to it with Leviathan. The Daniel Stern character in Leviathan makes that movie much worse to me. Miguel Ferreira is just grumpy all the time, but he's also
grumpy
has
and
friends.
he messes up, and you actually feel a little bad for him. He's sort of the antagonist of the movie, but he's really messing up. He's not a bad person. He's
so good in this movie. Miguel Ferreira is so good in DeepStar Six.
He's good in every movie, but and oh god, this movie comes out 1 or 2 years after, 2 years after RoboCop, and just before Twin Peaks. And this is him like perfecting that character that he plays and all of those things. Yeah, he is this fidgety, angry dude, like who also like, but you don't completely hate him. In RoboCop, he's not the villain of the piece. In Twin Peaks, everybody hates him, but he's actually a decent guy underneath it all. Like, yeah, he's so good in this.
So this movie is like, you see all these people and you're like, okay, those two are hooking up, and everyone kind of knows about it. They just started dating while they're down here. And then you're like, oh, well, these two are hooking up, but it's kind of like a secret. And they don't know, and none of it's particularly interesting or exciting. And none of it, like when it comes time for the monster part to happen, it doesn't pay off dividends. You're not setting up like character dynamics that then add dimension to the horror part of the movie. But I do find it kind of pleasant.
I get it. I mean, and it also, in a way, it's respectful because that is what's going on in Alien. Alien's just a much tighter movie. But Alien has that whole, there's cliques on, there's a lot of people who don't, there's something about people not getting along, but also not being like mortal enemies that's really interesting. Yeah. And it does make it more like The Abyss than any of the other movies we're going to talk about.
That's true.
Accidentally or not, this was the most Abyss-like of the movies. I think it was accident. And I think the cast is mostly TV people. I think Nancy Everhard is really good. She, to me, is like a sort of budget Amy Madigan. And I say that before Amy Madigan just won an Oscar, but like original formula Amy Madigan. And she's in the 1899 Punisher straight-to-video movie. This was basically her one chance to be on the big screen. She has a tiny role in 48 Hours. She has a very inconsistent accent. I don't know where she's supposed to be from, but it's okay because she has gravitas. And then you can't really point to a male lead, but the closest is probably Greg Evigan, who at the time, you probably don't know this, you're a little too young, he would have been one of the title characters of the sitcom My Two Dads. And the other dad on My Two Dads is Paul Reiser. And so in my mind, Paul Reiser was on the set of My Two Dads bragging about aliens. And Greg Evigan got jealous and like signed the first adventure horror movie. It came over his desk. He signed on to it like that because he's going to get his own goddamn aliens movie and shut Paul Reiser right the hell up. This is all conjecture, but it's probably true. And he was also the lead of the Tech War series, which is a cable-based series. This is just weird Gabe shit that like I know. It was a series based on a William Shatner's sci-fi noir books that I read when I was 9 or 10. It was one of those things where I read 2 of them and my parents got excited because they wanted me to read, so they bought me the rest of the set, and I did not read them. These books were also ghost written by a guy named Ron Goulart, not actually William Shatner. But so he's just a guy who was on this horrible USA Network sci-fi show I watched and this not very good sitcom with Paul Reiser that I watched.
He was also the lead of BJ and the Bear, which was a big show in the 70s when that was happening. Yeah, he does not bring much to the table here. He is attractive and he is masculine and he looks physically capable.
Most late 80s way, like Mr. Mustache and mullet. I don't think he has a mullet in this, but I always picture him with a mullet.
He has that George Michael 5 o'clock shadow beard.
Yes,
where it's like a 2mm beard that covers his entire face.
Like they had to have had a special shaver that would leave your beard at a very perfect 5 o'clock shadow in those days.
Right. My favorite actors in this movie are Tom Bray and Ronan Carroll as the submarine pilots. They are so fucking funny together.
Yeah, well, they're the two that I think actually have, in the scenes where I feel like they're just making up dialogue to fill space, they're the two that I think actually have some rapport.
Yes.
And kind of pull it off.
I could definitely see some improvisation happening in their scenes. Because they are kind of just like sectioned off from everybody else. There might be like one scene where Tom Bray is interacting with someone other than Ron Carroll. But as far as we know, they just sort of live in that submarine and they're just like always hanging out. And they have this like fun relationship because Ron Carroll, you probably know him. He's the cop at the end of Friday 13th who's like, there was no boy in that water. And then she's like, oh, then he's still out there. Like, so he was kind of in his late 40s, early 50s in the early 80s. And so by the time you get to here, he's like an older man. Tom Bray is this like nerdy looking guy. He was best known at the time for being like a computer hacker character on like a 70s or a, like early 80s detective show that had like a techno side of it. But he was just sort of like, I'm the nerd, and you could believe me as a nerd because I'm a nerd, and I'm going to be in Prince of Darkness, and I'm a nerd there too, and I'm typing on a computer. And those two of them, you don't expect them to go together necessarily, but they just instantly sink into like a rapport that is just, you believe that these two have discovered to their shock that they kind of like hanging out with each other. So like all of their scenes together are wonderful. A lot of this, it's a lot of TV acting. A lot of that adds to the Next Generation kind of a feel. Definitely does not have the star power of Leviathan.
No. The Latvian actor, Eli Baskin, who most people remember as Peter Parker's mean landlord in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. I think he's super likable in this, but he's just isn't on it very. Like I would prefer he was the lead instead of the generically handsome dude, but he just doesn't have much to do.
You would think with a cast this big, there was going to be like a lot more monster kills. But like the very few of them actually get memorably taken out.
No, I mean, okay, so there's a guy, Taryn Blanque, or Blanque?
I think it's just Black.
Is it just Black? Okay.
I think it's Taurine Black.
You know what? You're probably right. He seems like a nice guy. He gets what should have been a cool death where a door closes on him. But for some reason, Cunningham doesn't get violent with it. It's just the door closes on him. We don't like see his guts tumble out or anything.
I wonder, 1989, the MPAA is starting to crack down on stuff.
Yeah.
I wonder if they were like, this isn't a slasher movie. It's $8.5 million. So it's probably like 2 times or possibly 3 times more expensive than your average Friday the 13th movie. Maybe that was like one of the directives he got from Carol Coe that was like, we don't want to have a bunch of guts and stuff.
Yeah, and I could even see them considering a PG-13 for this. It sort of has that level of not too much gore. The Nia Peoples character, she's sort of the TNA, but it's not full-on nudity. And unfortunately, she gets paired with the Matt McCoy character, who is a annoying sexual harasser. Not as annoying of a sexual harasser as a different character of the guy you already mentioned from Leviathan. But it is sort of interesting that these movies are like, and then there's a guy who just sexually harasses everyone. And it's I don't know.
Matt McCoy is the worst actor in this movie.
Yeah, and he was a pretty well-known actor. I don't know why he's so bad.
He is the guy who replaces Steve Guttenberg in the Police Academy movies. And
I don't think I even knew that. Ugh.
Yeah. So in Police Academy 5 and 6, it's Matt McCoy, and he is like a guy who's not as good as Steve Guttenberg. He has this thing where he's like trying to do a Steve Guttenberg thing where he does like a little smirk after every line of dialogue, but instead of like, because none of the dialogue has any crackle, like none of this has any like thing that really feels like a joke, he'll say something that is like vaguely kind of reminds you of something that could be amusing possibly, and then he'll just sort of like sink into a smile like, yeah, I know. Like, it's almost like he stops acting and gets really satisfied that he remembered his line. It's that dumb little smile on his face. And I'm sorry, Matt McCoy, I'm sure you're a lovely person and in fact very talented, but in DeepStar 6, that dumb little smile you get on your face is so embarrassing that every time you're on screen, I just feel like a little bit of secondhand humiliation.
I'll say this. I knew guys like him at the office when I worked at an office. He's
a very specific kind of dork.
I'm trying to think of Cindy Pickett is good. She's the doctor. She's probably the most prolific actor here other than Ferreira. And I think that she has surprising chemistry with Ferreira. I think the two of them may have some really interesting scenes together. And I think she looks a lot like Nancy Everhart. So there are times when they are wet and wearing tank tops that I can't tell which character is which.
Yeah.
Towards the end of the movie, because they are two of the survivors, or the longest term survivors. That I did mention the gore doesn't work. There is a scene where Ferreira's character freaks out and gets into a pod and does not take the time to properly decompress. So he basically explodes internally. And it is pretty bloody. But this is 1989, man. You got to go full Rabutin puppet bursting eyeball Total Recall shit with this stuff.
You want at least 12 frames of Scanner's head explosion.
Exactly.
But the pre-Scanner's head explosion of that scene in Scanners where like you have the kind of bladders on the face that are pulsing, and you have like the blood pouring out of the pores and stuff, that stuff is in here and it's really gnarly. I think that is like a really...
You just need the climax. It's a good scene without the climax.
I almost wonder if the fact that you don't have that cartoonish punchline of the head explosion is what makes it feel more painful to me. I really do imagine the pressure of your body like crushing itself, and that's a pretty good special effect. Worth saying, Murderer's Row of people doing special effects on this show, and I say show because I watched a bunch of special features, and all these guys who work in this industry call it a show. But you have Mark Shostrom, who is sort of the overall supervisor of special effects. He worked on Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Poltergeist 3, Phantasm 2. Richard Strutzman was sort of more the technical guy who was like building out engineering a lot of the special effects. He worked on Gremlins, Enemy Mine, Poltergeist 3. Greg Nicotero was the creature supervisor. He needs no introduction. He's Greg Nicotero.
In a lot of ways, Sjostrom was the pre-KNMB. He hired all those dudes, and they became KNMB, and Nicotero being the end.
And then David Kinlan was the animatronic supervisor. He worked on From Beyond and Friday the 13th Part 7. Toby Sells, who did special makeup effects, was on Phantasm 2 as well. When you look at anyone in the special effects crew and their filmography, it is just, here were the genre films of the 80s. And again, this is the kind of movie that you sign up for and you work on it for 3 or 4 months, and then you get to go and do something else. And so that's why all these guys are not working. I mean, obviously, The Abyss is also not a movie that has a bunch of monsters and shit, but there's a reason why these people are taking this kind of a job more than they are taking the Abyss.
And I want to give special mention to Steve Wang, was a special effects guy on this, and he went on to direct the live-action Guyver movies and the movie Drive with Kadeem Hardison, Brittany Murphy, and Mark Dacascos, which is a really fun kind of slightly sci-fi action kung fu movie that I highly recommend people check out. Part of the reason that Cunningham is shitty about this movie in interviews is he really, really didn't want to direct it. He is very clear on that. It was supposed to be directed by Robert Harmon, who would have been coming off The Hitcher, and I would prefer the guy who made The Hitcher made this one. That said, Robert Harmon didn't do a lot after Hitcher. He did a whole bunch of Tom Selleck made-for-TV movies. He made the 2002 movie They, and he made the 2003 movie Highwaymen. Yeah,
this was Sean S. Cunningham's producer era. The last movie he had directed was 1985's The New Kids, and the next movie he directed after this was 2001. So, he was like, that's, you have to make a lot of decisions and do a lot of hard work, and I kind of like money.
Yeah.
So maybe
and
I should be a producer instead.
I believe he was also producing, what was it called? The House sequels, the horror.
Yeah.
Oh, fuck, I can't remember what it's called.
It's
the one
just House.
But there's House, and then there's the third one is called Horror.
The Horror Show.
Thank you. Yeah, I think Horror Show was being made around the same time. Rather watch Horror Show than this. Ron Cobb did a lot of the concept art for this, who was a Star Wars, Alien, Total Recall, and The Abyss. That explains some of the nice production design because they had a really good guy designing it. And my favorite quote from the Fangoria article is co-writer Jeff Miller claims that they had envisioned the film as an undersea version of the original Howard Hawks' The Thing, which sounds to me like something you say when you ripped off Alien and want to redirect the conversation by saying you ripped off one of the movies that Alien ripped off, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the same way James Cameron's referencing Day the Earth Stood Still. He's not talking about Close Encounters in interviews.
Exactly.
I only have a couple other notes. One is that Mac Ahlberg was the cinematographer, and he was I believe Dutch filmmaker who went to America to be a cinematographer on a lot of low budget 80s horror movies, especially Charles Band movies. So he shot From Beyond and Reanimator, but he also shot Zone Troopers and Trancers 3 and shit like that. This movie doesn't look as bad as some of the other movies we'll be talking about in part 2, but of these three, of Abyss, Leviathan, and DeepStar Six, DeepStar Six is definitely the crummiest looking movie. And then the only other thing I wanted to say about this is you mentioned the ways it rips off Alien. One of the ways it rips off Alien is that there's a chest burster, but it's a kind of a novel way of getting to a chest burster, which is they have shark darts, which are these lances that have darts at the end that inject CO2 into whatever they pierce. And the idea is if a shark gets near you, you fill it with CO2 and then it goes away from you. And in this case, while they are fighting the monster in water, one of the characters backs up against Miguel Ferreira's little spear and gets the shark dart through the back, and then his chest starts to expand and explode, which I think is a fun effect. And part of the Miguel Ferreira character arc of his sort of constant fuck-ups that are making everyone hate him, but more importantly, making him aware that everyone hates him in a way that he's getting more and more upset about, which is why he's so good in this movie, because you actually kind of feel for him. You're like, man. Because the first thing he does is he goes, well, we have to get rid of these nukes because we have to abandon ship because of this monster and all of that. And he's just sort of following a form, a
protocol,
workflow to how do you get rid of the nukes? And what he does is he goes, was the entity you encountered aggressive? And they're like, I don't know, it was a fucking monster. Yeah. And he's like, okay. So then they have to blow. So then he just selects blow up the nukes. So he just detonates like a bunch of fucking nukes a mile away, and then that causes a big like underwater tidal wave that is then the reason why everything is sort of leaking and flooding and stuff like that. So everyone's already mad at him. He's already kind of a prick to everybody. And then he accidentally explodes their boss's chest with the shark dart. And that's what makes him so upset that he like runs to the escape pod and tries to get out of there without decompressing and explodes. In general, I like the sets. I like the sets of this and Leviathan quite a bit. And I like this movie in particular more so than Leviathan. They flood the sets in a way that I think is really cool looking and compelling. And like when you get those like slow motion shots of the monster leaping out of the water and the electricity is going haywire and there's sparks flying off in the background out of focus, and you're getting this like kind of strobe effect on the monster as its claw comes out of the water or whatever. It's just sort of like, yeah, no, they made it. They made a fucking monster movie. They didn't shirk their responsibility. So there's definitely as crummy as certain aspects of this movie is, and as sluggish as it is for like the whole first 45 minutes, there's parts of this movie that where it just really fucking hits.
Let's move on. I have so many notes. I feel bad about this. I'm going to figure this out, though. March 17th, Leviathan comes out. George P. Cosmatos or Comatose George. Anyway,
Cosmatos is what I always say.
I'm going to read this one real quick. Underwater deep sea miners encounter a Soviet wreck, sounds familiar, and bring back a dangerous cargo to their base on the ocean floor with horrifying results. The crew of the mining base must fight to survive against a genetic mutation that hunts them down one by one. Genetic mutation part's a bit of a spoiler, I guess. This movie takes place in the far-off year of 2027. And I think I've been unfair to this one over the years. I'm willing to admit that this is my problem. It's silly of me to resent it for being so much of an obvious Aliens meets Thing clone for so long. I think that because Leviathan, The Thing, and Aliens were on cable television so much, that this was like my first real connection with media literacy. And so I'm like, wait a minute, this thing's like those things. It's stealing from them. How dare it? And I think that it just sort of stuck with me for a little bit too long. Because this is a pretty amusing movie. And also when it was on TV, all three of those movies were barely edited when they were on TV. It was very funny how much gore they let them get away with if it was aliens doing it. It's the same thing as when you're a kid and you first learn to play guitar and you are like, oh my God, this is the same riff as that other song. And then you get a little older and you realize there's only eight chord patterns in pop punk music anyway. So you just got to get over it. And this was co-written by David Peoples, who would get an Oscar when he wrote Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven. Mm-hmm. And then with Jeb Stewart, who did not get an Oscar at any point.
But he did write Die Hard.
He did write Die Hard, which deserves an Oscar more than Unforgiven.
He co-wrote it with Stephen E. D'Souza, but still.
It was based on a book, but still, they all deserved an Oscar more than Unforgiven deserved an Oscar. Yeah. Okay, this movie's good, quote unquote, for three reasons. It's a really good cast. Yep. It looks stylish, I think. A lot more than Lords of the Deep, which we're going to talk about next one, or DeepStar Six. I think it just has a stylish look to it. You are right about the flooded set not being as exciting, but I think it's stylish. And Stan Winston goes hog on the creature effects. And it's much more in line with The Thing. It's not quite to that level, but it's more in line with The Thing than Alien. So it feels like a little bit of fresh air. And I think this is the second best normal movie next to The Abyss. It's still not nearly as good as The Abyss. But it looks, I don't know what the price difference was between this and DeepStar Six. This looks a lot more expensive.
If Wikipedia little info boxes on the side of the pages are to be believed, this movie cost about a little less than 3 times as much as.
Okay, so there's a lot more money.
DeepStar Six,
okay, so that makes sense. It looks
this is
like
a Dino De Laurentiis production.
Yeah,
worth noting.
Who always comes up when we do these things. There's always a Dino just came up when I was talking with Luana about B fantasy movies. One of them had to be Dino De Laurentiis.
You talked about how this movie has like a stylishness to it. It looks good. It's shot by Alex Thompson, who shot fucking Legend and Excalibur, and also would go on to shoot Alien 3. Oh, and The Keep, the Michael Mann movie, The Keep. So I was talking to you before we started recording. I'm like, Alex Thompson in short form worked with Ridley Scott, Michael Mann, and David Fincher, and that would be enough to kill most people.
Yeah. This is a patient man.
Yeah.
Also, a patient
shot,
man who people trust. Maybe we'll say that. Yeah.
Also shot Labyrinth, which has probably had a lot of unique challenges, and also shot Cliffhanger, which also seems like that would be a nightmare shoot in some ways. So very accomplished cinematographer here.
I'm going to say a little bit about, how did you say it? Cosmatos? Cosmatos?
Yeah, Cosmatos.
Cosmatos, it's probably Italian. Cosmatos. Okay, so Cosmatos isn't what you'd call an underrated filmmaker, but he has garnered a pretty good cult following over the years. But these days, I think he passed away just recently. He's mostly remembered as a go-to proxy director that stars would use to get around union rules or to fill in because they were too busy acting to make other on-set choices. I've seen people refer to him as this sort of glorified second unit guy, which I think is kind of a mean insult because, like, if you watched any of the Paul Greengrass, Jason Bourne movies, you know how important a good second unit guy is. Because I feel like those movies, like you watch the Division of Labor and Greengrass is really good about saying, like, I didn't shoot any of this shit. This was all second unit, all these chase scenes and everything. But the rumors are that, and I don't know how much we can put in these, but that he was a stand-in for Stallone on Rambo First Blood Part 2 and Cobra. And then he was stand-in for Kurt Russell on Tombstone. And the allegations on Tombstone came from Russell himself over the years, so there's some truth to them, I guess. But I feel like movies should have multiple director credits anyway, and we didn't really get that. Like, even until 2007, even the Coen brothers were not able to get dual directing credits.
Right.
Undersea Miners and Undersea Oilers are kind of the same thing. They're both dealing with Russian mistake. We have a million references to Alien, the blue-collar nature of the crew, what we were talking about earlier, the dinner table. The costume design reminds me a lot of Alien.
We have the Paul Reiser character in the form of, what's her name? Meg Foster.
Meg Foster and her beautiful eyes. Interesting because she is only talking to them via, like, satellite. So it's very, very alien in that the company is talking and making all the things, but instead of being a computer program, it's an actual person. There's a monster early on that looks just like a face hugger, which I think is ultimately unrelated to anything. I don't know what I don't know if that's part of the mutation that escaped, but like Daniel Stern's
I think it's just a sea spider.
It's just like a sea spider, yeah. So, but it moves like a face hugger. There's a little bit of face huggerness to it.
Oh yeah. That's Stan Winston being like, well, we know how to do a spider.
Yeah. We
just
made
did
up
that.
And there's a countdown to destruction on the climax and the big fake out ending where the creature followed them at the end. Those are all very, very, very Alien-esque. And then from The Thing, there's the idea that the crew has all this downtime because they're separated from everybody. There's the lack of trust among everybody, the fact that any one of them could be infected right now and not realize it. Though it's a little less than The Thing where they really don't realize it. It's more like they just aren't showing symptoms yet. And there's the idea that the monster absorbs the victim's knowledge so it can use what people know against the other people. And there is a much shorter but similar scene where there is it attacks a blood supply. And it's not the case in Alien or in The Thing where the blood supply would reveal which one of them was the Thing. It's that it drinks blood. And for some reason in the kitchen they have a blood tube going through the wall in the kitchen, and they come in contact with the creature through sort of similar means. It's a sunken Russian boat instead of an abandoned Swiss science colony, but there's a lot of similarities where they go onto this boat and they're seeing all the dead bodies and they're seeing something happened here. What happened here? What do we? And they find stuff. And so
and you get the sequence where they're like looking at a computer readout of like. The doctor's trying to figure out what's going on, and so he's like looking at the computer the same way Wilford Brimley is like trying to figure out what's happening. That whole sequence, you get the idea of like the alcoholic doctor who suddenly has to sober up real quick to get because things got serious, and he's this sort of disgraced medical doctor who has to redeem himself. I think the Richard Crenna character in Leviathan is very Wilford Brimley in The Thing.
Yeah, yes, very, very, very good. That thought that came up because I was mentioning earlier, like, why do they always have to have one dude that's sexually harassing everybody? And I wonder, I always give John Carpenter all this credit, but if Carpenter would have made The Thing with female crew, would that have been one of the guys? Is it just that they're all straight men, so it never comes up?
Is there much sexual harassment in Prince of Darkness? Because that's the thing with some females.
There's not, actually. No, it's actually pretty well, like, any flirting is... I feel like... the one character does slight, the guy from Big Trouble in Little China has like a very, very minor bit of sexual harassment.
Sure.
But yeah, it's much more like it's just the 80s and that's just the way people are, unfortunately. It's a lot like the Daniel Stern, for all we're talking about how awful he is, you got to give him credit. He is pulling off one of the most heinous human beings and he's pulling it off with aplomb. It's crazy to think that at the exact same time he's narrating The Wonder Years as he's playing this absolute skis bag, and that he's about to make Home Alone, where he also plays a skis bag, but a family-friendly one.
Right.
This character's a little like his City Slickers character, so I guess he was sort of typecast, but still, it's kind of he's a lot. And I just kept on thinking, imagine this would be the perfect movie if you, instead of him, had the Miguel Ferrer character in that role of the guy who's fucking up, like, because I like that character and not this character, and if you just moved them, and then it would just make DeepStar 6 a little worse because you'd have two sexual harassers and I could forget about it.
The thing about this character is, so like I was a shift leader of a fast food restaurant in Chicago, and something that you have to deal with when you are in charge of a business that is in a major city is that there is an unhoused population who can behave sort of unpredictably. And they come in and you can't just start yelling at them just because they're unhoused or whatever. You have to treat them, with respect and dignity. But like you also have to keep your guard up because their behavior will be unpredictable often. And sometimes it can get hostile and even aggressive. And we have one person in particular who I can yell at, this is an old job now, but I could yell at as soon as he came in, because at some point he threw a chair at one of our employees. And that's when you're like, okay, well, you're just not allowed to step foot in the business anymore. That has nothing to do with your housing situation. You are violent. But like this person, and there was there's a handful of people you just get to know. They're like, okay, they live in the neighborhood. They'll pop in from time to time. They'll be a little unpredictable. They're a little mentally unstable. None of them were ever as ghoulish and aggressive and off-putting as Daniel Stern in this movie. He is feral in a way that is like, this is a movie about like, one of the things this movie's trying to take from Alien is like really hard, like, hey man, I'm in a union and the corporation's trying to screw me at the union, and I know you're in charge and you're trying to make both parties happy, and I'm trying to apply pressure to you to take my side because we're really concerned about labor issues and the idea of, is this fair work, and like, is this a reasonable working environment, and are we being fairly compensated, and what's the deal with our quota? And it has all of that. And then you have this character who you would never believe for a second would exist in this real environment. Everyone would have fucking killed him already. Like everything he does at every given moment is just about trying to be as gross and nasty and disgusting as possible. And every time he's on screen, and I'm a Daniel Stern fan, every time he's on screen, I'm like, oh, fuck, it's Daniel Stern. I cannot stand him in this movie. It is so, like, I know what they're going for. This kind of character has a place. Miguel Ferreira, as you brought up, is kind of this character in Deep Star 6. They so overshot it in this movie. I wonder if this was George Cosmatos who wanted to, like, push things bigger and further. When I think about like the guy who directed Cobra, maybe I think like a tasteful depiction of human behavior is not something he's interested in.
No.
But boy, does this character really make the first part of this movie a lot more unpleasant than it has to be.
Fortunately, he's the first to die, I believe.
Yeah, but they do a little bit of a slow burn, more so than The Thing. With this moment. So you do still have to wait about like 45 minutes before.
I suppose. On the good side, Peter Weller's in this, and I really like Peter Weller. And he sort of has this uncanny quality.
He's so much fun.
Voice. He has this kind of natural stiffness, which is perfect for RoboCop, but I think it works in this role too. There's this.
Yeah, he's uncomfortable.
Yeah. He's put in the situation where he has to be in charge, and he has no interest in being in charge. and he has to discipline people like Daniel Stern's character. There's this great gag towards the beginning where we see the crew bickering, and it cuts to him looking straight into the camera and awkwardly dressing them down to maintain control. But then the camera pans back and we realize he's practicing this in a mirror. And I think it's the best thing in the entire movie. I don't know if they stole it from another movie, but I think it's incredibly clever. But there is a point later in the movie where this is like a contagion, and his exaggerated mannerisms pulled me out of it for a second, because he's investigating a dead body and they give him a surgical mask but no gloves, and then he removes his mask with his bare hands and rubs his mouth in consternation. And I was just like, no, you touched the body. What are you doing, man?
Other than Daniel Stern, I really like all of these characters and all these actors and the sort of dynamic of these people. But the thing about this movie is, so like my theory about DeepStar Six is Sean Cunningham likes to hire people that he has absolute authority over, and that if they do a bad job, it won't reflect poorly on him because he can just blame them for being inexperienced or whatever. And so that's why you hire two guys fresh out of college and give them very little time to write a movie and tell them like, just do this. And then they do sort of a generic bad job of it. I think Leviathan, which is written by two accomplished screenwriters, one of which was one of the fucking screenwriters of Blade Runner.
Yeah.
I think you get very similar results, because what you're doing is you're saying, hi, we're the Dino De Laurentiis group. We have a $21 million movie that we want to make. We need to start working on all of those sets and all of those special effects and all of those costumes now. So you have 2 weeks to have a rough draft. You have an additional week to have a shooting script. And if it's not there in time, we'll figure it out. And so there's just something kind of sloppy about this movie that I don't associate with the writer of Blade Runner. I don't associate with the writer of Die Hard or The Fugitive. There is just like all that stuff with Peter Weller. Obviously you're sort of setting up a character where it's like he's in charge, and then in a crisis situation, he has to sort of find himself as a leader of men, even though he is not like a natural leader and struggles with that. There's no point in this movie where you see the character like make that choice or make that change, or like something from that early part of the movie locks in when the monster shows up and he has to take charge. It's just another fucking alien. All the little details about the characters and who they are just kind of arbitrary and thrown out there and don't actually pay off and feed into the monster movie part of things. It's just really sloppy in a way that's like, probably these are people who were assigned a story and were given a not very inspiring edict, which is rip off someone else so we can get there first. Probably if you're a screenwriter, that's not going to like get your creative juices flowing. I just think this movie, as much as I like that Peter Weller character at the beginning part of the movie, I really miss that none of that matters by the time you get to the end. None of his relationship with Amanda Pays, they're like sort of
that's what I was going to say, is the Amanda Pays stuff feels like, oh, we have to have a romantic subplot here. We're going to have one scene which is sort of romantic, and then we're going to move on.
Yeah, exactly. There's not a lot of thought put into this sort of a thing. The nature of the monster doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because they're like, well, it's a genetically modified human. Wait a second. Who genetically modified this human? The Russians? How? They can modify things genetically. Okay. So is this monster a thinking thing, or is it just sort of like a creature? No, it's a thinking thing. Okay, what does it want? It's kind of like just a monster. It kind of just kills. Okay, but it has all of the thoughts and feelings of our people that it's sort of absorbing. It's like kind of a blob situation where it just gets bigger and bigger as the people that die like join this weird mass where there's just like arms and legs sticking out. And it's like none of that matters. The monster is very ill-defined. It took me like 3 viewings of this movie before I even realized that it wasn't just like a weird undersea monster, that it was like a specific mutation, because it just doesn't make any sense to how the rest of the movie plays. Yeah, it's a frustrating movie because like the special effects are awesome. Stan Winston, not just the monster, but like the dry for wet that they shoot underwater. The way they did that, they have a set where the ground is covered in like loose dirt, and then they put bellows into all the boots of all of the underwater deep sea diving suits, so that as people step, a plume of dirt comes up, and it's like you're stepping on the floor of the ocean, and it's all shot in slow motion. And it's like, and then we also have these flares that were burning, and so there's kind of ash floating around, and it kind of looks like plankton. Like the sets and the special effects of how they do all the underwater stuff, it's all really cool and convincing, and it's shot by Alex Thompson. It looks great, and it's just sort of like when you watch DeepStar 6 and everything's kind of junky, everything feels of a piece. You're kind of like, yeah, this is just kind of a junky monster movie. And when you watch Leviathan and it starts off and you get these great actors, Ernie Hudson's so fucking good in this movie.
Yeah, I wanted to. Yeah, I'll mention him. Yeah.
But anyway, you get all these great actors, and you get this budget, and you get these special effects, and it's like, okay, so it's going to be a real movie, and it's like, no, it's kind of just a junky monster movie.
It's worth noting that Stan Winston did do some of the effects in the original The Thing. He did the kind of flower monster that comes out of the dog. His studio did that because Bottin just did not have the time to finish everything. He knew what he was doing as far as things go. But I have to say the final monster is kind of disappointing because it's just a monster. It's not like... I mean, I guess the final monster in The Thing is also just sort of a collection of parts, but it just has a better look to it, I think. This one just looks like a particularly angry gill man, basically.
So I theorized about David Peebles and Jeb Stewart, the screenwriters, like sort of not being given enough time and just sort of delivering a rush job for the screenplay. When you watch the special features on the Leviathan Blu-ray, that is explicitly apparently what happened with Stan Winston's studio. Is all the people who worked in that in that company were just sort of like, oh, we didn't have nearly enough time to do anything, and no one could make up their mind about what the monsters should look like, so we had to keep changing things, and eventually we ran out of time and money, so we just put every design into one, and that's why you get that weird monster at the end, because no one had a strong conception of anything. Yeah, so this is, I think at a certain point during the making of this movie, Stan Winston also accepted a job from a different film. And so like the workload got bigger, and then there was another special effects studio that was supposed to be designing the deep sea diving suits, and then the studio lost faith in them. So Stan Winston's like, yeah, we'll do that too. So the story of the special effects of this movie are also kind of like a bunch of extremely talented, very experienced people being put into a really crazy situation and then just, making the best of it.
Apparently they were, Winston Studios was approached for The Abyss and DeepStar 6 is what he said in the interview site. So he could have picked any of them. I don't think he would have had much to do in The Abyss. I guess he would have made the aliens at the end, the sort of light aliens. You were talking about, I think that the two best performers in this are Hector Elizondo and Ernie Hudson, and they just don't have enough to do. There's just not enough screen time given to them. And I just feel like Hudson is such an underrated, because he doesn't have much to do in the Ghostbusters movies, but then you watch a bad movie like Congo, which we kind of mentioned, and he just rules that movie. He's so good in that movie that I just think people don't know how good he is, because he's good in bad movies and he doesn't get a lot to do in good movies. But I hate that he dies at the end of this.
It's so stupid.
He doesn't even die heroically. He's one of 3 survivors, and he died. It's so funny how much it mirrors the end of Deep Blue Sea, which has the black guy, the white guy, and the lady, and they all survive. And then the original ending had the black guy die, and audiences didn't like it, so they changed the ending to have the white lady die. This one just had the black guy die because that's what you do in movies, is what it felt like. He doesn't even get a heroic thing. He just sort of dies. And then Amanda Pays and Peter Weller are not even that broken up about it.
Well, it happens in like a second. It happens in like 2 shots, and you're just sort of like, the movie doesn't even give you time to register it as important, because it's so arbitrary.
And it's almost like, oh shit, we didn't record him for the end. We already shot all those scenes on the boat with Meg Foster, and we forgot Ernie Hudson wasn't there. I guess we have to kill his character. Like,
I think because they want that final pun intended punchline of Peter Weller decking Meg Foster in the face.
Yeah.
They had to work backwards into like, okay, how do we get that image and it plays correctly? Because if it's Sigourney Weaver punching Paul Reiser in the face and that's how your movie ends, that's one thing. But when it's a man punching a woman in the face, oh, okay, well, I mean, she still deserves it, but we gotta be a little more careful of how it's depicted. If we have a black guy there, it's gonna feel like a gang is coming to beat her up. like if there's 3 people approaching her and then she gets punched in the face and then there's 3 people laughing, that seems cruel. So it really should just be.
They did originally want that character was written as a man. It said in an interview. Meg Foster's character, so it probably didn't have any of that problem originally, but then they hired Meg Foster to do the character, and then everything you're talking about happened all poor anyway.
But it's also the thing where it's like the tone of the movie is all wrong. Like the movie is like it's kind of emotional about the fact that it's not just a monster eating people, it's like really people dying in really fucked up body horror ways, and people witnessing their friends die in fucked up body horror ways is like where the horror comes from, is how upsetting all of that is. And then at the end they're like, actually this needs to be like a fun, cool adventure thing, so we're gonna have Peter Weller shout out a one-liner before throwing dynamite. And it's like, okay, well, what was the one-liner?
The one-liner is basically just the same one-liner from Jaws too.
It's just eat this, I think.
Yeah, but it's like, oh, we can't say smile, you son of a bitch, so what else are we going to do?
Right.
Oh, I don't know. And then,
well, fuck you too. No, you can't do that one either.
Yeah. And Peter Weller's like, oh, I got it. I know exactly what I'm going to do. Eat this. Again,
it's so lame.
He's so stiff, but there's something intriguing about it in certain roles. Like Naked Lunch, he's so stiff in that movie, but it's so intriguing.
I think he's good in this. I just think they make some bad tonal choices.
Yeah.
Like this movie should end like Predator, where like at the end of Predator, Arnold survives, but he's kind of all fucked up about it.
Yeah, he's messed up.
Like that's kind of how this should end, is just like Peter Weller and Amanda Pays just kind of like holding on to each other. You get Ernie Hudson in there, and they should all 3 of them be kind of like holding on to each other to be like, Jesus Christ. Not like a fun little like gag where it's like, yeah, we punched that bitch in the face, which is the attitude of how this movie ends.
I got in the interview, the Starlog interview, the director claims that Leviathan was 2 years in the making, but then he also claims that it isn't really anything like Alien or 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which is patently not true. And then he gets a little more defensive and he says, one can say that all movies are comparable. And someone might say it's like something else, but in the final analysis, it's very unique. And it was just like the whole interview is just him going, nuh-uh. It's a really sad interview. But he's the one who admits he read Sphere. So he didn't write the script, but he did direct the movie. And so he had read Sphere, and he might have had some of that in mind. He's the one guy who has said anything about that. Other guys don't mention Sphere at all. I don't actually, one more thing, I don't understand the ending because they realize Meg Foster is lying to them and that they've all been declared dead, very similar to what happens in Alien. But then the Coast Guard is still out looking for them at the end, and she's with the Coast Guard. So I don't understand what happened there. Is she lying to them and they're all just considered dead? Like, that would make more sense. And then they come up and they just float around, and the movie ends like The Thing. Like, we don't know what's going to happen next. Maybe they'll be found. Maybe they'll just die at sea or something like that. But instead, there's actually people that rescue them, and I don't understand.
Yeah, I didn't see anything in any of the special features about reshoots or anything like that. But that would be my assumption, is that the script was written one way, and then as they were making the movie, they kept rewriting it. So it would be like it just seems like a production where they got excited about the idea of beating James Cameron to the next James Cameron movie.
Yeah.
And then the process of actually making that movie turned out to be more expensive and complicated than they thought. And so the stakes get bigger and you need to make more money. And so there was just more and more meddling from the producers and stuff like that. And what you get is the movie is like The Monster, where it's just kind of a bunch of shit that's stapled onto itself, and it doesn't feel like coherent. It just feels like a movie produced by deeply insecure people. The way that like modern Marvel movies are like kind of, oh well, we're trying to figure it out while we were still editing it. We were trying to figure it out, and we had one idea for the special effects, but then we made we made the CG animators like throw all that work out and do something else in a quarter of the time. And like it just seems.
Speaking of Pixar, there's a little glimpse of the Pixar lamp. They did the digital readouts on the computer screens.
Oh, that's
and,
fun.
And I noticed that, and I'm like, oh, cool, I noticed that. And then, of course, it's in the IMDb trivia. Somebody else noticed it years ago, but I was very proud of myself for seeing it at the time.
Pixar, I don't remember the full history, but like basically Pixar started as like a part of ILM or like shared the same offices as ILM, and ILM taught themselves how to do computer graphics with equipment that Pixar left behind. So like Pixar's also in some ways responsible for The Abyss. I enjoy Leviathan. It looks good, and a lot of the special effects are good, and it has a lot of good actors, and it has
Jerry Smith's score is really good. Or Jerry Goldsmith, not Jerry Smith. Jerry Goldsmith's score is a big cool thing.
When I read Sphere, I had the Leviathan score in the background. That was like sort of my background music when I read Sphere. And it's also a brave enough movie to say that in the future, chainsaws will look completely different. They'll look square. The futuristic weapons they bring out. You get the flamethrower because it's alien, but then you also get these chainsaws that are like really weird and angular that feel like they come from like a WB show from like the late 90s that would like play late at night, like some syndicated sci-fi thing. They look so weird and junky. And it's just a chainsaw. And it's like, number one, why is there a cabinet in this base that just has two chainsaws in it? And number two, why is the chainsaw like shaped all weird and square? Like it's like a high-tech future thing when everything else in this movie, down to like the Pepsi branding and the product placement, Pepsi is like trying to remind you of 1989.
Yeah, but it's 2027. So that next year, that's what chainsaws are going to look like.
That's right. That's right. We haven't gotten yet to the square chainsaw revolution.
We're not quite there. I want to say that Michael Carmine, who has probably the roughest death scene, he gets the sort of suckerfish thing stuck on his stomach and it's not quite going in and he can't get it out. And Ernie Hudson's too scared to help him. He actually passed away just after this movie was released in October. So that was a bummer. But I feel like his character... this is the only movie I've ever seen him in where I feel like his character has a bit of gay coding, kind of similar to what you said about what's his name in The Abyss, whereas he usually played very not gay characters, but he was a gay actor. So I think that's a little interesting. I found out that this was shot on the same Cinecittà Studios sets in Rome where Terry Gilliam was shooting The Adventures of Baron Munchausen.
Yeah.
And the fun fact about that is that Terry Gilliam's assistant director, who apparently solo directed a number of the action scenes, was Michele Soavi, who is Dario Argento's protege, and was frustrated with his mentor, and went on to make The Church, and even non-Italian horror fans might know he is the guy who directed Cemetery Man in 1994. So there's a small possibility that director of Cemetery Man walked by this set.
I'm sure a lot of people were walking by this set trying to poke their head in. This is the kind of set where you want to be like, hey, what are they doing in there? This looks really cool. Literally the only thing left I have to add is I forgot to say my favorite line of the movie, which is Meg Foster is on like a video chat thing, and she says, I know you've been through hell. And Ernie Hudson goes, bitch, we're still here.
Yeah.
which I watched this movie once about a month ago. I have seen a ton of clips of it and all the special features on the Blu-ray. I watched it with a commentary track last night, and then I watched it again this morning. And every single time I get that line reading, I fucking die laughing. And I'm like, Ernie Hudson, you're a treasure.
My last thing is that we were talking about Linda Ronstadt's song mentioning Tucson. Peter Weller wears an Arizona Wildcats hat at one point, which is the University of Arizona in Tucson. So
there you go.
We got double Tucson mentioned. Pew, pew, pew. So yeah, this went longer than I thought, but you know what? It's already in 2 parts. So we're gonna cover. Oh shit! How many? What do we got? We got next time.
4 more movies.
4 more movies. We got. These are all the B to Z grade movies. We covered the 3A to B grade movies. We got Lords of the Deep, which is the Corman produced one by Marianne Fisher. We got Aliens from the Deep, which is the Italian one from Antonio Margheriti. We got The Evil Below, which is straight to video. And then we got The Rift, which is by Juan Piquer Simón. which is a Spanish one, which we're kind of cheating because it wasn't actually released until 1990, but it still counts because of when it was in production and what they were clearly trying to do. It was made basically at the same time as Lords of the Deep, which made it to theaters faster.
Right.
And then just because we're already going over time, but I want to mention, I just found out that actor Luigi Montefiore, a.k.a. George Eastman, has passed away today. And we talked about this 6'9" giant a lot during the Spaghetti Western episode where Patrick developed a crush on him.
Big crush.
Because he was just in a lot of 1968 Italian Westerns. And he later hooked up with Joe D'Amato and was a towering monster man in Anthropophagus and Absurd, which we later, Patrick and I covered on the 1981 slasher movie episode. He kind of fits in this realm. And if it would have had a single underwater scene, he directed the 1990 movie Metamorphosis, which is a sort of entertaining ripoff of The Thing that unfortunately does not take place underwater, so we didn't cover it. But rest in peace, Luigi. And then, I'm not going to do it until next time, because until next time, just watch those 4 movies, and then we'll be back soon. Kinda. We're kind of busy. Patrick's got some stuff going on.
My life is finally settling out, but for a while there, everything was out of control. So we'll figure something out.
I got family visiting in a week here, and then I'm actually going to go out to Jesus Christ, Chicago for a bit to see Patrick and some other people. So yeah, I'm and eventually someday, the 3 of you that listen to Wizard Jail, I have an episode of that done and finished, and I just haven't been editing it, and I don't know what my problem is. I don't know what my block is, but I will do that, and then you will at least have every episode of the show covered. I'll figure that out. I promise.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, goodbye, everybody.
Bye. I forgot.
Bye.